Good evening. My name is Jerry Story. I'm the Vice Chair of the Board. We have this evening a smaller membership than usual. Jamie and I are present. The Chair, Gary, is present by phone, and that will be our number for the time being. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Shelburne Selectboard for January 16, 2018. And the first item of business is to consider approval of the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda for January 16, 2018 Shelburne Select Board meeting.
Jamie has moved to approve. Gary has seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, will those who approve signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Thank you. And those who oppose by saying nay. Thank you. It is approved 3-0. Josh Hine and Dr. Parker abstaining for reason of absence. The next item on the agenda is public comment, for which we have 10 minutes, and which will, as our current practice, continue until item 7. My one thought that I'd like to share with you at the moment is that we have both state representatives as well as representatives of the school board here tonight to present materials on legislative status as well as budget. And if there are questions that relate to any of those subjects, those would be, of course, most effectively addressed at the completion of those various presentations. Are there any other public comments? Would anyone else like to say anything at this time? Mr. Saar, John?
I realize that what I'm about to say, and I'm reading my notes because I want to make sure I say it in sequence, I think it won't be popular, and I ask you to understand that I say it out of a profound sense of duty. The town is about to appoint a new police chief. The town places that responsibility in the hands of the town manager. Ordinarily, this would not be a problem, but this is not a normal time in Shelburne. The town manager has admitted that he forced the resignation of the previous chief, the highly popular Jim Warden, for reasons that remain murky. The general belief holds that Mr. Colangelo framed Chief Warner with a phony rap to force his retirement. If you want to know how much we all paid for this disgraceful episode, you must look for a six-figure sum hidden somewhere in the town budget. How do we know this? Mr. Colangelo admitted as much in a mea culpa at a previous board meeting, when the chairman, now living in exile in Florida, I believe, denied that
Jerry, I object to these personal attacks.
You mean you're coming back?
John, I think that's
okay.
Probably.
It's just a humorous touch, but... The chairman denied that any select board member had prior knowledge of the chief's suspension. Mr. Colangelo said that's not true. The town charter says the town manager has the responsibility to appoint the new chief. Mr. Colangelo has already signaled that he has a handpicked candidate. No way. Fellow townspeople have mentioned other candidates, and many have named Al Fortin as a worthy successor to Chief Warden. I suggest that the town invite Senator Leahy or other distinguished political figures in the state to form a committee to evaluate the candidates and make a recommendation to Mr. Colangelo. Thank you.
Before I respond to John, on behalf of some of us here, is there anyone else who'd like to make a comment? Hearing none, my response, John, is threefold. One, with respect to your opinion and your right to express it. Two, with some consternation at the use of some of the wording that you use, and I'll quote, forcibly retired. I think that's not only erroneous, but too critical by means. And on the whole matter of appointment of a police chief and the town manager's absolute authority to do so, notwithstanding your suggestions, which are interesting about even a statewide involvement, I'd be very happy to sit down with you at a time convenient to both of us and discuss that with you. I'm going to suppose that the town manager, in his own name and in his own time, will respond to you about some of the other things you've said. And without prejudging those, it would be my sense that he will take and should take serious issue with some of your statements, which remain yours to make and ours to respect. Are there any other comments from anyone on any issue?
Yes, Jerry, I
Yeah.
would like to respond to yet another personal attack by Mr. Sarr. He said I was exiled. That is the state of being barred from one's native country. Mr. Sarr is once again wrong. It's insulting, and he should have. I wish you had stopped him.
Are there any other comments that anyone else, thank you, Gary, that anyone would like to make at this time? The main, one of the two main reasons for our being here tonight, and happily so, is to learn about legislative status from our representatives, and as importantly, to learn about budget status from our school board representatives with Peter's help. And per charter, we have scheduled this evening and will now hold a joint budget hearing with those entities. The first up is the town. Joe, correct?
Correct.
Correct. And you want to take over from here.
I'm happy to. Yep. And so, Peter, you might need help me with
And we're reminding you that there are copies of this material available on the desk for those of you who are not as familiar with budget at the moment as you would like to be.
Okay, I'm going to give a somewhat pared down version of a budget presentation I gave about a month ago with a little bit more detail with the budget that was given to the select board 2 weeks ago. So this budget hearing is a requirement of the town charter, and it must be done before the select board warns the town meeting. So we're doing this like we do every year. Okay, so just to review, this has been a long process to get to this point. Like I said the last time, by this stage in the game, I'm completely sick of the budget, and everyone else is just getting warmed up because we're 6 or 7 months into a pretty long process. We started back in August, and we've been working all the way through. The select board will need to sign a warning for town meeting by January 23rd, and then voters will vote on town meeting, and this budget is to be effective starting July 1st. Okay, so just some highlights of this budget. It's an $8.8 million budget. It's roughly $700,000 more than the current year. That number can just be a little bit misleading because it also includes the $250,000 for a new ambulance, which is not part of the property taxpayers' responsibility. Nonetheless, it is about an 8.5% increase from the current fiscal year that we're in now. In terms of the impact it would have on your property taxes, projected, roughly a 9% property tax increase, which is substantially more than any other budget I've put together in the 4 years I've been in Shelburne, and more than the budgets I've put together in other communities as well. That would be about a 3.5-cent tax rate increase, which would mean $35 additional per $100,000 of assessed value for you, the property taxpayer. There's 3 major drivers that are impacting the tax rate increase. The debt service that is owed now on both the Quint and the library. Second of all, wages and benefits in the police and dispatch department. It's really just the police department, but for police and dispatch. And then third, on the revenue side, pretty low grand list growth is projected. All right, so here's my famous pie chart that does not equal 100%, but the point here is that if we were, again, looking at this as an investment portfolio, we pretty much all of our eggs are in one basket when we're generating revenue to support the Shelburne municipal budget, and that is the property tax. 75% of all revenues that come in to support the town budget come through your property taxes, and anything else is, I don't want to say meaningless, of course, but substantially less important than the property tax. The next most significant financial, the revenue source, dispatch, ambulance, recreation program, again, very small amounts relative to the property tax. Okay, speaking of property taxes, of course, my friends at the school, they're here as well. When you pay your property taxes in Shelburne, similar to many communities in Vermont, 80% of your bill goes in support of the state education fund, and 20% go in support of the municipal functions that we're talking about in this budget. Okay, this is just an estimate, projected increase on your property tax. I'm just taking a stab at the school. I don't know what they're going to say today. So projecting that the change in property taxes for the municipal portion would be $35 per 100,000. Looking at the tea leaves, it appears that the state education tax rate is on its way up. So if the if the education rate goes up at the same amount as the town rate will, and I don't know if that's going to be the case or not, I guess we'll find out, your entire property tax bill will go up roughly $180 per 100,000 of assessed value. Okay, another impact on your property taxes is the common level of assessment. And in Shelburne, the CLA right now is 96%, which means I think that we don't need to do a reappraisal anytime soon, but it does impact your property taxes. The town of Shelburne will charge you at $100,000 of assessed value, for example, and the state of Vermont will apply a 4% premium on that when they apply the tax rate. So that impacts your taxes as well. All right, like I said, the grand list growth, we're looking at, I guess you could say, anemic grand list growth projected for 2018. On average, over the last decade, with a few peaks and valleys, it's been about a 1.5%. We're looking at 0.5% to support the next fiscal year budget. Okay, so the FY 2019 budget, I showed this slide, is just updated with what's actually in the line item budget now, but the police department is, makes sense, is about a quarter of the entire budget. Highway department is the next, debt service, fire department, library services, and then some insurance. Those are the significant expenditure items for the budget. And the total expenditures I put is $8.3 million, and I took out the Shelburne Rescue part of the budget because that kind of skews the amount since that's off the property tax roll. I just thought it might be easier to look at this way. All right, if we broke up what you pay as a property taxpayer, and we just estimated that you're paying $2,000 per 100,000 of assessed value, that's about right. $1,600 of that is going for education. $400 of that is going for municipal operations. Of that $400, if we broke it up, approximately $100 per 100,000 of your tax bill is going to support your police department. Approximately $60 of your tax bill per 100,000 is going to support of highway department functions. 25 or so for the fire department, library services, 25, and like I've said a few times, Shelburne Rescue is on the house, so to speak. It's paid for 100% through non-property tax sources of funding. All right, so some identified challenges for the FY 2019 budget that we looked at. So first was the cell tower revenue share. Over the last few years, that's gradually gone from the general fund to the water fund. So up until 2017 and before that, it was 75% of the revenue. It's about $100,000 a year was going to the general fund, while 25% went to the water fund. Over time now, there's a commitment both on the Water Commission's side and the Select Board side to move that to 100% water fund and 0% general fund. In this current fiscal year, it's a 60-40 split. Projected or asked for in 2019, it's 80-20, 80% going to the water fund, 20% going to the general fund. And then moving forward to 2020 and beyond, the idea is that it would be 100% to the water and 0% to the general. Okay, so another impact are the police department. We're looking in the budget to do some, I'm going to call them minor upgrades to the station, mostly to redo the locker room. The lockers are old, so new lockers, and then a few other things in the department is budgeted for. It's budgeted for over a 5 years period span. There's the embedded social work program that we are looking to fund in the upcoming year. The collective bargaining agreement I spoke about, that's what's driving those increases to the wages and benefits. And then the one part of good news is that we're looking at reducing our total fleet of cruisers and also using a different type of vehicle. The end result of that is a net savings for our equipment fund for the police department. All right, stormwater budget. So what's proposed in the FY 2019 budget will cost you as a property taxpayer about $8 per 100,000. What's not included in that are a lot of unfunded capital requirements that are mandates by the federal government and the state government that we're just not doing right now because it would really bust the budget. So what is actually required to support the stormwater functions for Shelburne is about $25 per 100,000. We're funding at $8 per 100,000, and this is one of the reasons that's driving the idea of a stormwater utility that the next select board, starting in March, will really need to work at. All right, long-term debt is an issue or something that's driving the budget. So I don't have a pointer here, but this is what last year's slide looked like, and this is what this year's slide looks like. So this is FY 2019. The red makes sense, fire truck. The green is the library, so you can see the increase from 2018. And then you also see that's the gift that keeps on giving in the sense that next year the budget will include more of a payment for the library bond since that will be the interest and principal payment. So that's something that we're going to have to deal with in future years as well. All right, library temporary location is something we've had to deal with during the budget, not just the new library, but where a library function is going to be housed during the renovation project. Okay, we talked a little bit about the fire department and proposals that Chief Wilmette and the officers and Peter and I looked at. The goal being to extend the time that we're able to operate fully with a volunteer department. And we are trying to do that, not just for financial reasons. I think when the fire department gave a presentation, if we were a full-time fire department, it'd be probably 7 figures or more in terms of the cost of the town, and we're able to get by on $400,000 or so. And the 2 initiatives, I guess I'll call them, that we're trying to implement in this budget, and that's budget for. One is to budget for daytime coverage of the volunteers. So what we have, and what most volunteer departments have a problem with is, well, if a smoke detector or something goes off at 10 o'clock at night, there's 30 people there. The problem is during the day. Do we have people who can, for example, get to the Bacon Street fire when it's going in the middle of the day. And the only reason that we were able to get to it this time, it was just so happened that the deputy chief was in this building giving the rest of us a fire drill. And there was no reason for that. It was pure luck. And so what is included in this budget is some additional money to have daytime coverage by the volunteers. The other thing that we're looking at, and this is something that I think the next select board will look at, is potentially a vested retirement plan. Included in this budget is a de minimis amount to show interest in the program, but the long term, the town and the select board will have to think hard about how that is going to be funded over time. And again, the goals of both of those are to extend the life of a volunteer-only department. All right, another item that we talked about in the budget, and there's some monies that are budgeted for, pedestrian safety, not just in the village, but town-wide. Certainly there's a kind of more grassroots and organized effort of some folks in the village, but there's also complaints down the General Green neighborhood and some on Spear Street of cars going too fast. And so there are some additional monies for some pedestrian safety improvements that have been budgeted for. Then there's some unfunded projects that we're trying to work on. For example, this project for the toy stores, the Toy Story, which is a town building. The columns are deteriorating. They need to be replaced. We've been kicking this project off a few years simply to make sure that at the end of the year, our expenditures aren't way out of whack. And we've been trying to do that to keep the fund balance, the unassigned fund balance, which the policy is 5%. At the last audit, we're certainly above 5%, but we're trying to be mindful of keeping that unassigned fund balance at that level. All right, so there's also some notable unfunded and underfunded items. So one of the hardest cuts to make this budget work at 9%, which is still a pretty big jump, was stripping quite a bit from summer paving. That's a tough cut to make. Staying on top of summer paving is important in order to ensure that long-term expenditures are not more than they need to be. The Open Space Fund, the request was $75,000. It's been funded at least the last 3 years at $30,000. Right now it's in at $25,000. The Ethics Committee asked for some funding. I've asked them to reevaluate that request and come back, and they are planning on doing that. The Village Dog Park, the committee has asked for some funding to move the dog park. I think that project can probably be planned on happening in the FY 2020 budget, or a real emphasis on a fundraising drive to do that. Okay, so some other notable underfunded and unfunded items. On the record review and zoning enforcement, we talked a little bit about that during budget discussions and what to do maybe differently with zoning enforcement. We didn't get all that far in those conversations, so there's no budgeted change at all. Not that it's not going decently now, but there's no changes. And then some technology improvements. That came up more last year during budget conversation in terms of making sure projectors and that audio visual, especially in the meeting room, that we have better slide projectors. There was a request from many committees on that, and there's nothing specific in the budget for those right now. And then another big one that's looking at us is the Bay Road Bridge. This is something that will be funded about 90% by the state when it is funded, but even at 90% from the state, it's going to be a six-figure investment for the town. At some point, we're going to need to either start saving, or there's going to need to be a bond that the towns going to need to look at simply to do the 10% match. Okay, so at the last, I think it was last week, I told the select board, Peter and I would find you 50 cents in the budget, and Peter and I have found you 50 cents in the budget of recommended adjustments, at least from staff. These are adjustments, mostly decreases to expenditure, and one exception, an increase in revenue for dispatch that staff believes can be made with, I can't say without any impact on services. Of course, there will be an impact on services because you're pushing projects down the road, or maybe you're not doing projects, but these cuts and this increase to revenue, if the select board agreed to these or some combination, I think could be done. And the total adjustment is $109,000, which is more than 50 cents. So a little bit of breathing room for the select board to consider. Okay, moving forward. So this was the public hearing. The select board wants to have any more official meetings to discuss the budget as it stands, including those adjustments between now and next week. It can do that, but the budget needs to be set for the town meeting warning on January 23rd. The absolute drop dead date for the town meeting to be signed is January 25th, but I think we should aim for January 23rd. And once that happens, then there'll be a town meeting vote, and then the budget will be effective on July 1st. So I'm happy to answer any questions. The line item budget is online. There's thousands of pages of background data notes that I'm happy to copy for anyone who wants them, but we can ask questions. So, I think you need a microphone. Microphone. Not for me. But for TV.
Yes, John Saw. You gave the rate of taxation, but you didn't mention that we don't all pay at the same rate. Could you explain how that works?
Karen in the back, she's probably not listening, might be able to explain it better than me. Well, everyone here, I believe, except for there are some veteran exemptions for the municipal portion of the tax rate. So the 20% that you pay to the town is pretty uniformed for everyone. The part where there is some differences is for the state education fund. I can't tell you exactly how the state gives out the deductions. There's a income adjustment up to 125,000 now. A household income. So a household adjustment up to 140,000 that the state provides. I wouldn't be able to describe the exact way that the adjustments work. Maybe Karen can.
Well, I can give you just sort of the basic thumbnail sketch of it. So if you're a homestead filer, and your income is below, your household income is below, I believe, $47,000 per year, then you get a fairly substantial homestead exemption and income sensitized. You're basically paying on your income, and you get a benefit for that. If your income is above that amount, above the 47,000, the income sensitizing is on a scale, so less based on your income and the value of your house. It also applies, they also take into account the value of your house. So it's a complicated formula, but I think the basic part to understand is that there's sort of two pieces to it. If your income is below $47,000 a year, or if your income is above $47,000 up to almost to $140,000 in this coming year, you're going to be on a sliding scale.
So, John, given the question, and I apologize, I don't have an answer here, I will try to do a better answer, a combination of these answers for my weekly report, if nothing else, to try to suss that out. Karen knows lots. Doris, there's a microphone up here.
Doris Sage here. In all these expenditures, Joe, where were the legal fees?
There is a line item for legal fees. I don't know which line item. It's in there. It's at 60,000.
But it didn't come up.
Well, it didn't come up as one of the main drivers. It is in the line item budget. Absolutely.
Okay.
I recognize the difficulty of being able to put together a budget in a time like this, but I also know that probably for the last 10 years, the Natural Resources Open Space Fund has been funded at probably 65% less than we have asked for. We've acquired some properties that have really been valuable in terms of stormwater mitigation and protection of farmland, which is something that the people of Shelburne have always valued very highly. And at our budget hearing the last time we came to a public hearing, I know Gary had asked if we would be interested in a penny on the tax rate, which is a far cry from $25,000. And Jerry had suggested that we at least raise it to $30,000, which was the value of the open space fund last year. Just to be able to pitch my story, the open space fund is actually a savings account, so that when we come to a large purchase, the burden isn't on the taxpayers. It amounts to maybe a few cups of coffee a year if we do it this way. And the positive votes for this has always been about 70%. One of the highest positive votes that comes out on the ballot. So I just ask that, as hard as it is, you give some consideration for coming a little bit closer. We have another big purchase that's anticipated this year of a very large property that's really very protective of water quality. And with that purchase, I think the fund will be close to zero.
There you go. So Dr. Metz first, then.
You may have been asked this before, but two questions in regard to the library, since that is a major contributor. Number one, is the time frame firmly fixed? That is to say, must we start it during this fiscal year? And if we must, question number two, is there any way that this project can be reevaluated, looking at any possible way to reduce the overall cost? Those are my two questions regarding the library.
I'll do my best to answer them. There's some folks from the library here too that maybe can help. But so the first question in terms of can this be pushed off? I mean, I guess the answer to something like that is always yes. In this case, however, I would want to at least tell people here that the first $1 million has been approved to move forward. So halting it in a sense could involve kind of halting like a building half built, built actually. So, I mean, you can always, things are always on the table, but it is moving forward. The first $1 million was approved by the board after the vote. So, expenses are being incurred and being paid now. I'd also say that interest rates are relatively low now. So if the town pushed the project off a year, I don't know where interest rates are going to go any more than anyone else a year and a half from now, but you would run a risk, I think, of the interest rate rising and the actual cost to the town going up because of that. And then the second part of your question was?
The second part was economizing on the construction, having another look
Sure.
at the projected
Yeah, and so that is going on now. They're are looking at that. The best way to do, one way that can be accomplished is that, as has been announced, there was a $500,000 gift that was given to the town that requires matching amounts up to that level. So the folks who gave that money are sending in checks corresponding to when money is raised. So a good way of taking $1 million off that project for the property taxpayer is to really make that $500,000 goal so that $1 million is taken off of it.
I was referring specifically to the construction part, whether or not it's been looked at carefully by competitive bidding and any way. There's more than one way to build a building.
Sure. So we made a conscious choice to go with a construction manager form of the project. So what we did was we got an architect, Vermont Integrated Architecture, on about a year and a half ago now. A few months ago, after the design was more put together, but before the bond vote, we interviewed construction management firms and brought on Neagley and Chase. And so one of the reasons to do that is that the town, Neagley and Chase, and VIA can work in a partnership to reduce costs. So there is an effort to do that. You know, hopefully that's a, yes, Chris?
So Chris Boyd, Thomas Road, you had discussed in the debt portion that the library and the aerial truck were about on this coming budget 4.5% of the budget.
That's about right. 4.5 of the increase.
And that's right. And looking at your chart, the library is a larger portion of that in this coming budget.
Yes.
So probably about 3%, maybe, or
Peter and
somewhere
I
in
did
that
that.
range.
Something. Yeah. I mean, yeah. The library amount will likely be more than the Quint amount.
Right. And
then certainly in FY
Quint-
2020 it'll be quite a bit more.
the Quint's going to hold pretty constant as it moves forward.
Yeah. So the way the bond bank structures municipal debt, anyways, is it's not the first year that's the most expensive; it's the second year. So what you're seeing now with the red on that chart, so in the current fiscal year, FY 17-18, that was in this year we're paying the interest only on the Quint. Starting in FY19, we're paying interest and principal, and every year thereafter, the payment for the Quint will decrease slightly. So FY 2019, we will have an interest-only payment due on the library, and then starting in FY 2020, it'll be the principal and the interest, and then every year thereafter, 2020, the amount will come down a little bit.
So in FY 2019, there's a pretty significant increase in that. How much does that increase on the library portion? That almost looks like it's probably.
You mean for when we go 2 years out?
Well, for the next budget year.
FY 2020?
Yeah. That looks like a pretty substantial increase.
Yeah, it does to me too.
Is that probably a 8% increase? It's going to more than double, or?
Can't do it in my head. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
I will have an answer for that on Friday within my manager's report.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Okay.
with the exact percent.
And what was this projected when the?
Yes, I mean did we? Sorry. So another way that the debt payment could come down on the library is that the town has an option to do up to a 30-year note for that. Peter and I put this together based on a 20-year note. So if the town, and this will be a select board decision in the next summer, would like to do a 30-year note, obviously the annual payment will come down a little bit. We'll owe more over the 30 years, but that would bring the green down somewhat if the town did that. And yes, I think that the materials that we sent out included that the projected impact of the library debt, the principal and the interest together, would be $35 per 100,000.
So was there any work done to try and scale it back to reduce it down some during the planning process?
I would say yes, and still being work done. It's not the most uplifting budget to give. I mean, I get that. And again, the goal here was to continue to provide Shelburne with the same level of services that we are providing now. I think a further conversation, maybe starting next year, it's a legitimate conversation to have, is the level of service that Shelburne is providing as a municipality, the level that property taxpayers want. If you want to pay less, what sort of services would you be willing to give up to pay less? There's other options to look at as a town. Other municipalities have implemented things such as a local option tax. I'm not necessarily advocating for that or not in Shelburne, but there are tools. That's the one I can think of off the top of my head that bring in revenue from other sources that help soften the burden on the property taxpayer. So there are some, I think the select board starting in March and April will have to look at a number of these challenging topics. Implementing a stormwater utility would certainly help with the property tax. The projections that for the average household, paying the stormwater fee would be about 60% the amount that you would pay for the same requirement through the property tax. So there would be an overall savings to the household through the stormwater utility if that is implemented by the board a year from now. Okay, thank you. You're up, Dave.
I think I'll do it the same way Joe did it, and then I'll just do the slide myself. You can bring him up and then you can just stay in the audience, Joe. Sit there. All right. So hello, my name is Dave Connery. I'm the chair of the Champlain Valley School District, which encompasses 5 towns, one of which is Shelburne. I'm also joined here by Joan Lennis, who's a fellow board member from Shelburne. I invited Russ Caffrey, but it does not believe I don't see him here, so it's unfortunate that Russ is not here. So what I'm going to do is walk through the budget numbers with a little bit of local highlights of Shelburne and go through the overall budget and the tax rate. So we're going to talk a little bit about the process, who was involved, go through the enrollment numbers, the budget, and discuss some of the articles, and then have an opportunity to answer questions. So just a little revisiting of how we arrived at Champlain Valley School District. I think it was in late 2015 or early 2016. We had a district-wide vote of what was the Chittenden South Supervisory Union to form one school district from what used to be 6 different school districts of CVU, Charlotte, Heinsberg, St. George, Shelburne, and Williston. And all of those overseen by the Chittenden South Supervisory Union. So we had 6 boards with 34 members. I'm looking to Joan to give me a head nod on that math there. And we had a vote to consolidate per a state directive. There were incentives to do that. So in September of 2016, we formed a new district. It became operational on July 1st of last year, 2017. Last town meeting, I stood before you as both a Shelburne district member and a CVSD district member and presented a budget for the unified district, which covers the year that we're in right now. So this is a little bit of a review, but I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that this is the first year where we will be voting completely as a consolidated district where Shelburne is a part of Heinsberg, Charlotte, Williston, and St. George for the same budget. I know many of us work in corporate America, and per quality standards, we're supposed to have mission statements. But this mission statement is different for me, I feel. It really looks at what we are as a school board member, but really as our administrators and teachers and all our staff and all of our schools are doing to prepare all of these kids from pre-kindergarten, what we call Triple E, all the way through until they graduate, to learn actively and collaboratively, think creatively and critically, live responsibly and respectfully, to contribute positively to their community and to pursue excellence. I think there's a lot of different changes that are going on in the education system right now. And I think there's, those of you who are in the workforce, you can say what we do now, Jamie, is totally different than what we were doing 15 years ago. And Jamie and I have worked together in the past, and I still think we're kind of young. But even things are changing. And it's not just about learning how to know that it's an I before E, except after C and sometimes after W, and not to know just your math tables, but to learn these complex problem-solving methods that you can apply across many different situations. And I think that's just a little tiny subset of how I view our mission and how it helps our district excel. The budget process wouldn't be what it is without all the help from all of our staff and our community members. We held a budget forum at CVU in November, and I have to be quite honest, I think Joan might agree with me. It was probably the most well-attended budget forums we've ever had prior to budget season. It was very nice to see so many people involved. Also, in the very budget process that we held in all of our budget meetings, we had 1 or 2 people from every single town. In Shelburne, we had Kate Cross and Barbara Martin, and we had at least 1 other member from each of the other towns. And these budget buddies, we call them, I feel like in 2018 we should have a better name for it, but I think it's still appropriate. These budget buddies bring different perspectives. Some of them have school-age children and some of them don't. And so they bring certain ideas to the budget process that really help us understand, like, oh, that's a good idea. We should consider that. So we really thank everyone, not just them, but everyone who took part in the process. So turning to Shelburne specifically, these are just a few of the amazing things that are coming out of Shelburne Community School. It's been a big year for us. We have 2 new principals. We have many new staff. We have a wonderful, almost completed newly renovated building. If anyone hasn't been to see it, you can email me and I will take you on a tour of it. I'd be more than happy to. We had a great open house to show that off. We have a couple new crosswalks and a new way to get into school. I thanked the town earlier in the year for their cooperation in helping us get through the first few days of school with the rec department, police department, and the administration of the school all working together to get everybody in there. But some of the other points, a young student, Olivia Brand, who one of these projects that every child in middle school does, it's a personal interest project. One of the things she did was raise money for hurricane relief efforts. It was a great project. The rest of these are all teachers doing exceptional work. Megan Maynard Jacobs was inducted into the Harvard Union Hall of Fame. I apologize that I do not know what these VAMLY and AMLY acronyms are, but I do know that Kelly Spring is one of our new PE teachers and is bringing a lot of new technology and methods to PE. They gave us a great presentation just a couple months ago, and PE is completely different than dodgeball nowadays. It's pretty exceptional. It's wellness, it's fitness, it's about becoming a better human. Diana Rich, an exceptional, and Sam Nelson, they're both great social studies teachers at school, and they're working hard on project-based learning and proficiency-based learning. And this is a big change for schools. This is kind of what I hinted at before. This is kids understanding concepts and applying ideas and solving multiple problems, not just learning facts. And that's what proficiency-based learning is based on. It's a big sea change in how to evaluate students, I would say. It's a change in philosophy, but kids still learn, kids still grow, and and it's great. And then we also had Natalie Lodge recognized for advocacy of diversity and inclusion, and a program that she runs called Changing Perspectives. So that is Shelburne. Here's our enrollment trends in the district. So you can see how it has had years of ups and downs. It seems like it's a little bit up, a little bit down, and then it's up a lot, and then it's down a lot. What you see here at 1718 is our actual enrollment number that is in the school of 723. Projections based on births and known preschooler populations that are in the town project that we're going to go up about 30 students, which is a big jump. This is, looked at that quickly and it didn't change, but that's because we switch over to CVSD as a whole. These are the numbers for the district as a whole. From this year to next year, we'll see basically flat growth. I think we see some growth, you know, like we said, we saw 30 in Shelburne, we see slight growth in Charlotte, and then flat to declining growth projected in Williston and Heinsberg. And I will point out that with consolidation, we do have the largest student population in a single school district in the state. So our budget numbers here for the 18-19 budget are just under 77 million, 76,838,000. The top line budget number here that you see is a 2.3% change in the budget, and our cost per equalized pupil is an increase of 2.3%. One thing I will say is that the governor gave us a target of staying at or below 2.5% in his directive in the fall, and it was very good to see that we are in our total budget and cost per student below that. Some of the big drivers, the big increases for this budget are an increase in salary and benefits of $800,000 for all staff. Our special ed and student services saw an increase of about $135,000. We have made an investment in technology and innovation and also some operations around the district. This is also an opportunity to spend some money on a closed entire network for the entire district. And rather than having 6 separate networks, each with their own security protocols run by different people, I think this is a great investment based on the current state of network security in our world. We've seen about $214,000 in consolidation savings, and a lot of that has come from consolidating operations staff throughout the district. I know we took multiple people operating single buildings down to multiple buildings being covered by single people. So so that's going to be a great thing to further capitalize on, not only just the labor that's working on that, but to prioritize and get a good grip on capital investments throughout the district. Yes, Gail.
Text saying that the TV wasn't working.
It's not. It's only being streamed right now online.
That's correct. It's at vermontcam.org. You can tell people.
It's at, what is the?
Vermont.
vermontcam.org.
Okay.
It's being
It's
streamed
online.
online.
It's not on the television because it's not a regularly scheduled night.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you.
That's fine. That's great. I don't know how useful it is for me to tell the people that are already on to say, text your friends and contact vermontcam.com, but I hope that folks can join on. So the sum of these 4 items here shows that our total district operating costs are at an increase of $856,000. So total operations, education delivery, staff payment is up only 1.1%, which I think shows a very good fiscally responsible budget that was put together by our COO and our finance committee and the rest of my colleagues on the school board. The other portion of the 2.3% increase is 1.2% of that total 2.3% number is debt service. And that debt service is the principal and interest payments for the Shelburne bond and also the first interest payment for the Williston bond. I know many of you maybe I talked about the new school that we have in Shelburne. A year and a half ago, Williston did a bond vote for $19 million to renovate their school. And so that, with the formation of the new district, the entire district will assume that debt and it will be spread out, just like Shelburne's, across the entire school district. And I don't know if any of you have ever been in the Williston School District, or Williston Central School, which is the big one in the center of town where the gazebo is. But they have portions of that building that were built in the 30s or 40s. Is that right, Joan? Does that sound right? They have portions of it that were built in the 30s and 40s and are still being used and have been highly renovated. And then other bits that have been renovated up into the mid-90s. So there's a significant capital need in that school that's being addressed right now. So in looking at the tax rate, we spoke about the budget expenditure line, which is the $76 million number. We receive revenues from the state and federal government for mostly, those are for special education and other things. So our total net education spending is $64,990,000. So the state then takes that net spending and divides it by 4,000. We come up with our spending per equalized pupil, which, as I mentioned in a previous slide, is up 2.3% for the whole district year over year to 15,749. We did pop in there. If we did not have debt service, our per pupil spending would only be going up about 0.9%. So Vermont education tax law has a set of wonderful calculations. I know there's a couple of members of the legislative branch that are here. I recognize two over here. I guess next time you see Kate at the Shelburne supermarket, just ask her to describe statewide yield for you. No, but what the statewide yield number is the amount of property tax dollars it requires to spend, or it's the amount of education you get from $1 of property tax rate. So this yield is down from the previous year. So it's going to take more tax rate in order to produce the same amount of education from year to year. So you take your equalized pupil spending divided by your statewide yield, and our equalized homestead tax rate is $1.60. However, as we consolidated through Act 46, we're in our second year of receiving a tax credit for that. And so we have an 8-cent tax credit, which prior to commonized level of assessment, our tax rate is $1.52. So we repeat that first two lines right there. The CLA number, which we just received last week, is 95.8. Last year's it was 96. And what this represents is a difference between the assessed value of properties and their sale value. So as you get further and further away from an assessment, their property values can go either way. But in this case, property values are going up versus the assessments that were made, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago. And so this number goes into the denominator of the calculation and thus increases your taxes thusly. And so prior to CLA, our tax rate was 1.52 and it is now 1.58, which is an increase of 7.6%. And I apologize that I omitted the slides with the dollars per 100,000. And so I will make sure that on town meeting day, those slides are in there and we'll do those calculations. So we'll just move quickly to the articles. These are pretty standard. This is all the information that you will see when you go to vote. Article 8 is, will you approve the budget in the amount of $76,800,000? That is what this is. Article 9 is, shall we apply our current fund balance in the amount of $750,000 to help pay down our current budget? So our $76 million includes $750,000 of revenue taken from operations in the previous year. We will still have $1.6 million roughly in our fund balance. Article 10, perhaps the most famous article that we have every year, the buses. Since we are consolidating all transportation operations, this number is going to look bigger, but that's because you're buying buses, not just for Shelburne, but you're buying buses spread across the entire school district for Heinsberg, Williston, and for the first time, we're going to start buying buses for Charlotte. For many years, Charlotte has they've contracted out their busing, and as we're consolidated, it doesn't make sense to have transportation in-house for 4 of the districts, but not for the 5th. And so we're going to terminate that that contract at the end of this fiscal year, and Champlain Valley School District will provide transportation for K-8 Charlotte students. So there is an increase of a few buses, of 2 buses, I believe, in this article to start buying buses for Charlotte. This last article is probably the most confusing, that will be the most difficult and confusing to explain. So we have to walk back to, this will only take a few minutes, I apologize. So when we approved the $9.25 million bond issue back in 2015, the article that you voted on said, shall the town borrow $9.25 million to make upgrades to the D&E wing and the roof? And some lawyers got involved and some opinions were rendered such that as we worked through this construction and came up with, we had a list of all the things we needed to do, things that we also really needed to do, but we could possibly do away with. We worked, the facilities committee worked diligently to save and effectively use a lot of the money of the $9.25 million, and they had a balance of $819,000 when they were at the point of the project where the D&E wings were complete and the roof was complete. And all along, there was an agreement, there was a plan, there was work in the architect's scope of work to include HVAC systems in the C wing and electrical work to do that work, to upgrade that HVAC system. However, because the article did not explicitly say the C wing, we're forced to ask the voters of the entire school district for permission to apply this balance of $819,000 to make electrical and structural upgrades to all over the district, because we need to get permission to apply the money outside of the D&E wing. But at the same time, 600,000 of that, which is the 600,000 that we were managing and saving throughout the whole project to do this HVAC in the C wing, of this 819,000, 600 of it will go to Shelburne to fix these last two HVAC systems. And I don't know if anybody ever came to any of my presentations on the budget, but this is the HVAC system that was the source of the helicopter story that I told many times. If anyone wants to hear the helicopter story, they can ask me later, but if you remember that, you'll know that it would behoove us to put this in because it's one of the initial things that we needed to put into the building. It was the intention the whole time. And this is just squaring up a legal article with a scope of work. So with that, we're all going to vote on this, and 600,000 will be applied to Shelburne, and the balance will be used to fix projects. Like one of the ones I can think of is the Charlotte Central School boiler is about to completely implode, and this money will be applied to fix that. So apologize if I'm only 16 minutes late, and you guys weren't exactly brief. So yeah, absolutely. So I would ask everyone to vote on March 6th to come to Town Hall and vote from 7 to 7. You can also vote early by coming to Town Hall. It's not absentee balloting. You can just show up, vote, and leave. And you can do that 30 days in advance. Also, we have an open seat on our board from Shelburne because after many years of dedicated service, Joan will not be running again. And we want to thank you so much for all of your time and dedication to the state and to the town and to the students of Shelburne and CVU. And so I really appreciate all of your time and wish you the best of luck. We will miss you on the board and your student-centered focus. That always helps us remember it's not just about numbers. So I appreciate that. And so with that, if there are any questions, I will take those now. No one's going to ask me about buses? I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, go.
And as you're buying new buses, have you looked into buying smaller buses? Because what I see is a lot of cars going to school, at least in Shelburne. I don't know how it is in the other towns.
Right. So the last numbers I saw were that buses were being utilized at a rate of 60 to 70%. And those routes are optimized such that no child is on a bus for roughly more than an hour maximum on each one of those routes. It's unfortunate that 100% of the kids don't take the bus, but I think our 60% to 70% number is a step in the right direction. Instead of thinking of, oh my gosh, look at those 40% of the cars that are there driving in and out of school, maybe we could say, holy cow, we saved 60% of those cars by kids taking the bus. We can't lengthen the bus routes to buy, to optimize those buses to fill them because kids will be on buses even longer and that would be unacceptable. Another thing that they do as well is it's if you're picked up last in the morning, so you can sleep until about 7:45 and then take a 5-minute bus ride, you unfortunately are the last one dropped off in the afternoon. So it flips back and forth, and in general, I believe that they try to make that system flip year to year as well. So like kids who have a short morning route will have a longer morning route the next year, but a shorter afternoon route the next. I think transportation is going the right way, and it's unfortunate that 100% don't, but they're doing the best they can.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Gary, before we close the hearing, have you got any comment you'd like to make? We may have lost him. Is there a motion to close the hearing?
May have lost our quorum.
We have no quorum.
I'm here. I'm here. Sorry, I was on mute.
No problem. Is there a motion to close the public hearing on the Town of Shelburne and Champlain Valley School District budget?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Do you have any comments, Gary, from the presentation?
No, except to thank Joe for another very good job.
Jamie?
None.
No, and the same, certainly to second the appreciation of Joan. And while she's famous statewide, to note for those of you who may not have caught Karen Horn's affiliation, she's the legislative director of the Vermont League of Towns and Cities, and a very valued partner and resource and guide and other things. That being the case, those who approve the closure of the public hearing should signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, and those opposed, nay. This hearing is so closed. Are there any comments on that hearing at this point? If not, the next item is the legislative preview, which is an occasion that we are, excuse me?
I have to check out, Jerry. Thank you very much.
Thank you and good evening.
Bye.
Which is an occasion that is, we, hit the wrong one. No,
So no official business can be transacted?
that's correct.
We're just a room full of people talking at this point.
We're just friends and family. With no due respect to our guests, for whom some might feel we owe some apology, but it's the nature of things, and your presence is no less valued for the fact that we are now on our own. The legislative preview is an annual occasion by which we all benefit, and we're, of course, very pleased to recognize both of our state representatives. You have the floor, and we'll defer to you as to your best sense of taking it from here.
Thank you. We also have Senator Pearson here, who's going to
Senator?
help flesh out things that we do. Do you want us to just stay here and face you, or do you want us to?
Our preference would be that, because the community will be, yeah.
Now that we're just a community meeting.
Yeah, we're just.
Yeah, that's right.
We're just hanging out.
Pick your chair.
Come up here and we can leave these for the audience. Work out just as well. Thanks, guys. You can pick who you want to be, too.
You can just switch chairs.
We'll just go 1, 2,
Yeah.
3, huh?
Sure, absolutely.
And as Jerry said, Karen Horn is here from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. She's the Director of Legislative Advocacy for VLCT.
So shall I kick it off?
You can, right? So, maybe in the past, we've kind of, when we've done this, it's been a little bit more of a free-for-all, I would say, but we've tried to at least, for this, focus on a few issues, and we're trying to look at them. It's hard to get away probably from individual feelings on any of these, obviously, but I think I try to focus on impacts to the municipality, in a sense. And the three issues that I asked our representatives and our senator and Karen to consider were marijuana legislation, assuming it passes, and it seems like it's going forward. Clean water funding and policies, and Chris Robinson, our water quality superintendent, is here as well, and then some municipal policing issues as well. So I was actually going to ask Karen to kick this off, if possible. I think, in a nutshell, Karen, maybe you can explain what the marijuana, the legislation that is before the governor right now for marijuana.
Well, very basically, and Senator Pearson can fill me in where I don't have all the details, but very basically, the legislation would allow a person to own 2 mature or 4 immature plants that could be raised in a dwelling. So if you have 4 people living in a dwelling, that's still only 2 mature or 4 immature plants. You could also possess up to an ounce of marijuana off-site, theoretically. And I forget how much hashish. There's also yeah. So the legislation does speak to the issues of driving under the influence of marijuana or marijuana and alcohol. It also addresses the issue of providing marijuana to under 21-year-olds and applies penalties for both of those things. And it addresses providing municipalities with some ability to regulate based on location, or essentially it says nothing prohibits the municipality from regulating locations. So, and then it has a range of issues that it speaks to regarding things like odor and those kinds of things. And maybe you could take it from there.
Sure. The one thing I would add, I think Karen's done a good job, is that any renter who wanted to cultivate their 2 mature plants would have to have written permission from the landlord. So the landlord does have a fair amount of control. This is a kind of compromise step. Some of us have supported a tax and regulate system, treat it like alcohol entirely. Our neighbor, Massachusetts and Maine are already in the legalized universe. Canada's coming online. But for instance, in Massachusetts right now is what we're talking about here, sort of personal possession and a small cultivation. They are about to, in July 1st, start marketplace. So you fully tax and regulate, and you can go to the store the way you would buy some vodka. In Massachusetts, you'd be able to buy marijuana. They took these 2 steps in one vote of the citizens. Here in Vermont, a lot of us are going to keep pushing, but the governor's not there now, and others wanted to see this as a first step, and so we'll see where we land. I think a lot of us agree that it's a good move to get this out of the criminal justice system. Not to celebrate marijuana, but I think the reality is the damage that comes from somebody using marijuana. Often the criminal, the crime or the charges are the worst part of it, right? And so we like to line that up. There's some estimates it's up to 100,000 Vermonters using marijuana every month. So it seems appropriate to a lot of us to move that out of the criminal justice universe altogether.
It does retain criminal penalties for use and cultivation over those amounts.
Absolutely.
And there are some significant repercussions if you sell to minors under the age of 21.
I have a question. As long as we're on that. I'm Sarah Tompkins, and I live over on Falls Road. And I know we worry about secondhand smoke. How are you going to control that? Because I work in the healthcare field, and people come in and they smell like marijuana. And for me, that smell is just as bad as having to breathe in cigarette smoke. You say you don't want your children breathing in cigarette smoke, but yet now we're going to let them breathe in marijuana?
It's illegal in public spaces.
All right, that's what I wondered. Would it be illegal?
In any other place where smoking is not permitted.
Okay, so this is going to be the same as regular smoking?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It's possible we could all have a tote right
No, this would,
Not yet. Oh, and this is a public
and
place.
this would be a public space.
I ask if you all seriously believe that our law enforcement agents will be able to tell the difference between a mature plant and an immature plant. And I ask if you feel that they will be able, are they to walk around with a scale and weigh if it's an ounce or 2 ounces? Sure. I mean, how, in goodness sakes, are already overworked law enforcement people that are having enough trouble enforcing existing laws, how are they to differentiate between these parameters that you set up? To me, it seems pretty unreasonable.
Well, I heard a fair amount of critiques from law enforcement. They never went to that point. I mean, we are already...
Why not?
Well, you'll have to ask them that. But we already are in a universe where the amount of marijuana, even we're in a decriminalized universe right now, so it's a civil fine if you're today found possessing marijuana up to an ounce. So we have, for a long time, put weight limits into the whole marijuana possession universe. For that matter, same applies to heroin and to cocaine, any other kind of illicit substance. The amount you possess dictates if it's a civil offense or misdemeanor or felony and so on. The mature plant thing, the definition is very clear. It's not unlike a tomato. You know, when it's flowering, it's thought to be a mature plant. Prior to flowering, it's fairly visibly obvious, and that would be an immature plant. The idea is for some people that would want to cultivate, there's, and I don't know much about it, but there's a lifespan for these plants, and at the end, you know, the plant is done for a year, and some people would want the ability to have starters coming up, and so that's where, and this is, by the way, mirrored precisely in the medical marijuana law that's been on the books for almost 15 years now, that would allow people to have some immature plants and mature plants.
It also does, the same amount of marijuana was, we decriminalized it, but now it's legal. So the police force in that sense has been aware and working with this. And we are anticipating, I would expect, I checked in with our legislative council, and I believe that it's very likely that the police academy will be doing training.
To your point, however, because we don't have a tax and regulate system yet, the way a lot of other states do, there's not money coming in to help with law enforcement or training or any of those kinds of issues. And one of our big concerns has been what kinds of funds would be available in a tax regulate system to municipalities to address those kinds of issues.
Enforceability is the issue, is one of the reasons why I voted against the bill. I'm concerned after talking with police in Shelburne and other areas that it puts quite a burden on the police force. Interestingly, just this past month, I've been working with Joe on the traffic issue, which is how do we change the speed limit? And one of the biggest concerns that has held us up for years on changing the speed limit on Falls Road has been enforceability. How do we expect police officers to enforce it, even if statute says it's okay? There's a lot of questions around enforceability, and so we had to do a lot of due diligence before we got there, and we're happy because we got there. So I think that it's the same sort of thing. I had kind of hoped that we'd wait a little bit longer and do some more, even though we've done a huge amount of work. We've done a lot of studies on marijuana and how we're going to be able to enforce it. It's hard. I think right now, when police officers pull someone over for speed, we question whether or not they're pulling them over because they look a certain way or act a certain way. And isn't that similar to whether or not they have marijuana in the car? Is the driver using it? Is the passenger using it? And does it smell? I mean, honestly, my son was pulled over and told that it was due to, I probably shouldn't be saying this, I hope he's not listening, but it was, he was on his way home from soccer, indoor soccer, and the police officers right away pulled him out of the car. It was 0 degrees. This was a few years ago, and said that his car smelled like marijuana and that he was going to check it. So he tore apart the whole car, didn't find anything except dirty socks and a lot of spilt milk. And so it did smell. But so I think it's really difficult. And that's was part of my worry, among other things.
And Chris had a question.
How will the state law parallel federal law on marijuana?
It won't. But the state is the police and our law enforcement. Just tactically, we have jurisdiction over the people that are in fact policing us. And so I think it's the 10th Amendment for states have this right to enforce our own laws. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, the Trump administration repealed the so-called Cole memo, which is the Obama administration saying if states take a different tack on marijuana, we'll respect that. The Trump administration has withdrawn that and said clearly, we're going to leave it up to our U.S. attorneys. The Vermont U.S. attorney said, I think rightly, we've got other priorities. So, this is true all over the country, but the fact of the matter is the people that enforce our laws are state or municipal employees.
So really we're telling our law enforcement to never mind enforcing federal law, just deal with state law.
That's generally true. That's that's sort of one of the divisions in our republic.
That's not really the proper thing to do, is it? When they're charged to
a lot of
enforce state and federal rules and regulations?
But they're charged actually to enforce state law. I mean, this is one of the makeups of our country is a republic, so states have these rights, and we're well within our rights to do that. We do that in, whether it's immigration policy we've been debating in the last several years. Anyway, I don't know if others have.
This is right. I hate to say this, but we were asked to answer a bunch of other questions, so we might want to move on, and then we're happy to talk to folks
I did want to ask one
one-on-one.
more question on this, and I was waiting for an opening here, but I think the bill that's before the governor, in terms of with a municipal hat on, I mean, I think there are police issues, but since it doesn't have a commercial component, it's a little bit different, but I think it's reasonable to think or project that at some point this is a step towards more of a commercial or regulated system. With that, I guess I would ask, I guess an analogy here in Shelburne was a year or so ago when we enacted an ordinance through our zoning regulations to regulate adult entertainment, right? So the question is, as the likelihood of this becoming a commercial industry in Vermont seems reasonable to think about, will municipalities have the right to pass ordinances? Ludlow has kind of an ordinance that addresses this. Has there been some thought about the local control to regulate locations, to make sure that schools are not impacted, daycares and things like that? The same analysis that we used for adult entertainment, for example.
Daycares are addressed in the current bill.
It does say that there's no prohibition on towns regulating through ordinances, which is sort of a backdoor way to address it. There were other versions of legislation last year that were specific about providing municipalities authority to regulate location of facilities and distance from daycares and so forth, as we do with a number of other kinds of facilities. So, yeah, hopefully we'll get something in eventually with a expanded bill that will provide that authority to municipalities.
And should something come forward, I would say that that's not going to happen the rest of this biennium. I think that is a closed topic. Should it come up next year, Karen Horn, I'm sure, will be right in there providing testimony, and I would encourage you to be in touch with your
I
concerns.
certainly would assume that the planning commission, select board, and the town would be somewhat, well, I shouldn't speak for everyone, but unified under, at least there should be some local control over aspects of this.
I would just add, I don't think that's a controversial point. Every proposal that's gained traction is very explicit that municipalities can have that say.
Right, and the lieutenant governor has started asking about pulling together a group of folks to start talking about tax and regulate, what it would look like, and how it could work in our towns.
So that's marijuana in a nutshell, unless anyone else has any questions on that. Or I was going to move to clean water funding and policies, if you don't mind. And maybe I'll just kick this off. Chris Robinson here in Shelburne is our expert, and I mean that. He's very knowledgeable. One of our concerns, as I was alluding to, we have a lot of concerns, but one thing I would at least kick it off with is, I was alluding to in the budget presentation that, we're looking over the next year of developing a stormwater utility here in Shelburne. A lot of other Chittenden County communities have done this. Why the state's looking at per parcel funding mechanisms and things like, is Shelburne going to be penalized? I'll just ask the question this way. Will Shelburne be penalized by being proactive in developing a utility to fund this by a statewide system? Maybe I'll just kick it off like that and see how we go.
Let me just introduce and then turn it over to
Sure.
Senator Pearson, because he has a bill in his committee. There are two bills, sister bills, companion bills, one in the House, one in the Senate. The move at this point is to start it in the Senate, and it will be addressing those issues. So you think you can?
Sure. I live in Burlington, where we have a stormwater utility. I serve on the Natural Resource and Energy Committee in the Senate, which is tasked to starting this year's water quality bill. I don't know is the answer. And maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but those of us who live in Chittenden County go to the State House and are proud of generating a good chunk of the revenue for the state and have to duck and cover. That we're often a target of, you people in Chittenden County, you don't understand. And Burlington, even worse, where I live. Oh, Burlington's not at all like Vermont. Well, that's which is, I'm kidding, but I'm not kidding. The sympathy for Chittenden County towns that have made this investment is not what a lot of us think is warranted around this kind of, I'm not sure I'd say penalized, but double sort of taxation. If we've made this investment up front, many of us in our communities, and now rightly the state is trying to step up to the plate and generate revenue needed to satisfy the EPA, satisfy basically a federal lawsuit that we're party to, and we have a settlement that we're kind of being watched. This is not optional at this point. So I will fight very hard to avoid a double taxation, or at least credit municipalities and taxpayers who have already been investing, done the right thing, taken responsibility. How successful I'll be and we will be is anybody's guess at this point. It's very early on in the discussion. And I'll just say that part of our interest in my committee, we're not a tax committee, but we are charged with proposing some ways to structure revenue, is also, and I think this is very important, to have some confidence in the investments that we wish to make. So before we ask Vermonters to pay money to clean up our waterways, which I think is a fairly broadly shared goal, we need to ourselves as legislators and citizens have confidence that the money will be well spent before we ask you to contribute. And we're working on that side, and that side is pretty difficult. I'll just say real simply, you have transportation plays a big role. So we have a Secretary of Transportation. Agriculture plays an enormous role in this debate. We have Secretary of Agriculture. We have Agency of Natural Resources and the Secretary over there. And all three of those agencies need to play a role. And a lot of us in committee are saying, Well, who's in charge here? And we get an awful lot of that, you know. Oh, that's not me. That's the folks over at transportation. And transportation goes, hey, you know, I thought that was A&R. This is a troubling dynamic. And we can't pass legislation that says, hey, Scott administration, do your job like that. You can't craft it that way. So we are working, we're very acutely aware of this taxation issue, but also I would say focused on building a process for out years where we can understand what projects we're going to be invested in next year, but also in the years to come, and having some confidence that local communities, you know, our watershed groups, all sorts of players are at the table and participating and really contributing to that. So we have confidence when we come and ask for revenue that it will be well spent.
I just quickly, Kate and I met with, is it Rebecca? From the Department of Environmental Conservation, and we talked with her a little bit. This is just a little tiny piece, but it seemed a little bit exciting to me, who's still new to a lot of this, that there is some money, discretionary money, to help towns transition, but you have to really be prepared. So in one way, Shelburne is pretty prepared because we've done a lot of work. And so we could apply for some funds directly to the board to help transition to a utility. So for that transition jump. And I thought that was a way that you might benefit from having your act together and being a little bit out front because you're ready to go. Is that the way you heard it?
And that the DEC does have grant money. We have connected the town manager's office with the person. You actually are in process of applying for those funds, I believe.
If Chris did you want to say something?
Yeah, so Chris Robinson, Water Quality Superintendent. So I have looked over S260. And I understand this is fairly new, so it's going to be changing a lot. But I did have a few concerns about it. One of it is being that municipalities will be responsible for doing a lot of the billing and collecting the fees to send to the state. It seems to be pretty unfunded mandate. They are allowing for a 0.225% of one, or 0.225 of 1% to be retained by the municipalities. That actually, if I did my numbers right, if it's a $40 per parcel fee, we have approximately 3,000 parcels in this town. We're looking about $270 is what the state would be giving to the municipality to do that billing. That's ridiculous. So also, there is a potential for a 75% reduction in that fee if the municipality does have a utility set up. And if we were to receive the full reduction fee, then you'd be looking at a $10 per parcel fee. That $10 per parcel fee would equate to about $67.50 being given to the town to administer the billing, sending it out to the state, and keeping track and sending reports of delinquencies to the state. Not to mention the fact that because we're doing the billing, residents within this town, if they have an issue, will be calling the town. So the town will also be fielding the questions about, hey, what's this mean? What's this for? How come I'm getting this? And so forth. So I think that needs to be looked at, because the last thing this town needs is another unfunded mandate being pushed down on them. Also, there's been concern about the billing actually going out with the tax bills, that people actually think that if it goes out with a tax bill, that it would potentially be a tax. That's the way that no matter what you say when you send out that tax bill, they see it on the tax bill, they just assume that's a tax. And that's not necessarily what it is. Also, you mentioned in there about giving private developers the ability to access those funds. Got some concern with that, especially if it's new construction. I would look at if it was something that was an existing parcel and a developer would say, hey, you know, I want to improve the stormwater on this property, and they want to come and do that on a parcel that's not permitted existingly, I think that would be worthwhile, but not necessarily for new construction. So I did have concern about the private developers having access to those funds. Also, the board that you have, there is no municipal representation on the Clean Water Authority Board. So that would be one thing, somebody that has some kind of a stormwater, water quality background from the municipality, from a municipality in the state to be on that board, I think is very important.
You're not talking the Clean Water Funding Board,
No,
right? The authority.
The authority, yeah, with the proposal for 260. And also, you know, just looking at generally some of the billing on how they're looking at assessing things, how they're going to create the parcel fees and how they're going to create, you know, develop all that seems to be awful burdensome and excessive. So definitely take a look at that and try to streamline it and make it as easy as possible, I think would be worthwhile. And also, there was some reporting of the Clean Water Authority to send stuff back to the Senate and to the House on the progress being made in the water quality side of sector of stuff. I believe at this point, DEC is pretty much in keeping an eye on that type of stuff, and the report really should come from the DEC, or hopefully maybe they ask the DEC to provide that. The DEC is already set up with tracking all these stormwater projects and everything else that's going on. I suppose it would be worthwhile if you had the agricultural sector also reporting in, but it'd be nice to have a clearinghouse. You already have the DEC set up that's collecting a lot of this stuff. A lot of the DEC there's a funding for the grants and stuff like that. So setting up another agency you have to get to get those fundings. Be nice if everything was one-stop shopping. So,
Well, I guess I have the pleasure of being on the committee, so I'll answer. But in the Senate, this is sort of technical, but it's the truth. We have to file bills in December 8th, and we are not at a point where if somebody had a new idea, we can't file a bill at this point. You could change a bill out. So what has just been described is a bill, but it's sort of a first draft, and I didn't write the bill. It was offered by Senator Bray and Senator Lyons. Senator Bray is the chair of my committee. So, and both of them, I think, said, well, here's some ideas. And we needed a bill to be able to debate this. Now, we may pass that bill, and it might not have a single word, literally, from the original bill. So I'm not to apologize for them, but the reality is it's a bit of a placeholder. So you brought up a lot there, whether, you know, the small percentage that the town gets, and it's a minuscule percentage, that is just pulled right out of the education tax. That's the percentage, I believe, that every town gets to administer and collect the school tax, and that which we, as we know, send along to the state. So it was just lifted from that. But we've already heard from others in committee that say, if you do this, and it's a big if, you got to put some, this is untenable to give us $270. There's a desire as that's proposed, there's a desire to recognize not all parking lots are the same. You know, if you have a big tract of land and you have taken steps to mitigate runoff, then maybe we shouldn't charge you the same as we're charging Kmart down on Shelburne Road. You know, sort of trying to understand that. But again, it's a placeholder. It's just trying to say, here's the basic idea, $40 a parcel, but here'd be some ways you could buy that down, including having your own stormwater utility. And then the idea that one of the central ideas in this bill, and this is, you know, I would say a very live question in my committee, and it will probably continue beyond it, is should we set up a clean water authority? And it would be kind of like the Green Mountain Care Board, or kind of like the Public Utility Commission that regulates electric rates and natural gas in our state. It would be a political body that the governor would appoint, but then they wouldn't serve at the pleasure of the governor. Okay, so the governor would appoint people that were trustworthy, had some experience, and then they would have their own independent authority. There's some wisdom to that. Some other states have done that. This would solve this question of who's in charge. They would very clearly, as is drafted in the bill, have some sort of forced coordination with DEC and with A&R and with the Agency of Ag and so forth. So I'm not personally wild about that idea. I don't think we need a new bureaucratic apparatus to handle this, but there is some wisdom to having a very clear authority, someone in charge, and somebody who is slightly removed from the day-to-day political arena of, asking taxpayers for money in an election year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that begins to give you some picture that these are really very early starting points as we're trying to tackle this. And it is a huge challenge. It's taken us decades, if not centuries, to get to this point. We're not going to, we serve for 4 months a year. And these are very, very big challenges. I'll just say for myself, one of the questions that I've been trying to raise is, can we continue to have conventional dairy in Vermont and expect to have clean water? Now, that is a very provocative question to ask in Montpelier. And I've been willing to ask it, and I think it's essential that we ask it. And I think, frankly, it's a question that's on a lot of people's minds. But you're not seeing that very central question to the quality of our water really being asked by the people who are in charge of cleaning it up. That's a problem to me. But that's a hard question, and we're not going to be able to uncover that in a couple of months. But as an example, somebody proposed as an alternative to the $40 per parcel fee today, we talked about it, as a tax on fertilizer and a tax on feed supplements. That's very, very provocative, for people that, we got to have farms. They got to earn money. We need them to be Vermont. But we can't just pretend that, the way particularly the dairy industry is operated, hasn't contributed in a massive way to our water quality. And we cannot expect to have a robust tourism economy if we don't deal with our water quality. So these are humongous questions. I don't have loads of confidence in where we're going to land this session, but I think we are moving forward, and I think people are asking tough, challenging questions, including many that you've raised, and I'm hopeful that we will make progress and, more importantly, create a roadmap to continue to making progress. I hope that helps.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I do just want to say that whatever you do, do think of the municipalities.
Karen's in my committee almost every day, scowling at me. So, for sure.
Chris?
I was just going to say that the water system and wastewater system operators that you have around the state are a tremendous resource in terms of how this could work and knowing what actually goes into keeping the waters clean and keeping our waste facilities running.
And if you, I don't know if you want to write testimony and send it to Senator Pearson's committee, or if something gets bogged down there and the bill comes over to the House, I'm more than happy. I think that you have a great perspective that I think is worth sharing. You've testified before.
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I can't believe you kept all those things in your head and then responded to every single one. That was pretty incredible. It'd be great to see Chris write down all of these things. I tried to capture them, but
for anyone in town, Chris is a very knowledgeable resource. So last topic, sorry, before we move on, and there will be a presentation after this on regional dispatch, so I don't want to necessarily capture that in here, but I did want to at least start on 2 topics with policing. One is, and I don't know how much traction this has, but I know that there's some conversations in Montpelier now about the level of service that Vermont State Police is able to provide municipalities, especially those who do not currently pay for their own municipal service. While that topic may not apply directly to Shelburne, it may in an indirect way, in the sense that, for example, Shelburne used to provide police services to Charlotte, and now for the last 3 or 4 years anyways, Charlotte has contracted with VSP. So I guess, what is the future of that discussion in Montpelier?
You want me to? I can start off because interestingly, Senator Pearson and I both sit on the Government Operations Committee, he in the Senate and me in the House, and the policing issues are on our agenda, especially though on Senator Pearson's. And not realizing that he was going to be here today, I went and spoke with his chair, Senator White, who's been very involved in the policing issues. So I have a quick summary, and then if you guys want to add in to that, that would be great, of what's going on, because Joe's right that there's been a lot of conversation, but not many changes right now. So this is similar to, in some ways, what we were just talking about with Senate 260. It seems like Senator White introduced legislation back in December as a placeholder because we had to get legislation in. And so let me explain why, because I think it's worth a quick conversation. So the question was municipal policing requirements in Vermont. Are they changing? And in order to respond to this question, a little context. About a year ago, Senator White introduced what was Senate 27, hoping to begin a conversation with towns, municipal police, and the state police forces regarding expectations of policing. It's just a one-page bill, and it essentially proposes to require each town to provide its own primary police coverage. And as you might imagine, that created lots of conversation. And that's really what she was looking for. It was to trigger conversation because she had heard over the summer of 2016, yes, a lot from her constituencies. And so she introduced this bill early on last year in order to have that conversation. They had a lot of testimony in the committee room and decided that there were plenty of issues to talk about. And so they decided to do a sort of road show where they went all over the state talking with constituents. They went to Bellows Falls, White River, Manchester, Brandon, St. Johnsbury, Newport, St. Albans, Waterbury. You can sort of see the trend. These are some smaller municipalities throughout the state, all ends, in order to look into how's policing going in your communities. Questions like whether our current statewide law enforcement coverage is adequate. Whether some or all of the towns should be required to provide for their own primary police coverage. Lots of things around retention and recruiting, all of those sort of questions. So then they came back this year, and Senator White, Senator Ayer, and Senator Clarkson introduced early on legislation that's is being referred to as a miscellaneous law enforcement bill, Senate 273. And this bill is, again, has some pieces in it that are provocative. The whole idea is conversation, so we get to the root of what are municipalities really looking for. So things like training issues is for law enforcement. Opportunities in different parts of the state. Right now, almost all the training happens in Pittsford, but a lot of people wanted more ability to do a training for an afternoon, police training for an afternoon. So looking into those this is in legislation. As far as the recruitment and retention issues, it became really clear that municipal police officers move around. They hop around to different municipalities depending on benefits and salary. The problem, that happens in a lot of jobs, I believe, especially I think in Vermont. And the problem with that, though, in the police is that once you pay for the training, then you've paid, your force has put in all this money for the training, and then your police officer moves to another town. And so this bill would look at, should that other town pay a coaching fee or a training fee, that sort of thing. The other issue that came up, I think, in a lot of areas was for state police, you can retire at 55 for being on the roads for 20 years. It's hard on police officers, as you might imagine. And so the issue is, can we make all the municipalities have a retirement age of 55 as well, so that then people wouldn't leave for that reason. They wouldn't leave a municipality to go to work for state police because they want to get an earlier retirement. So that's a question that's on there. Also, another issue that is in the bill is prohibit state police from entering into contracts with towns. As Joe brought up, should a town like Charlotte was contracting with Shelburne for a certain price that seemed like a pretty good deal. Actually, Joe felt that it might be too good of a deal. And so then you look into it and you find that, well, they could go with the state police for a lot less. But what kind of coverage are they really getting through the state police? Do the people that live in these towns understand that it means that if they have a robber downstairs and they're up in their bedroom and they call 911, does the person come as quickly as if you had your own police, your own municipal police force, or does it take longer because it's the state police? The other big question that in that same sort of venue or same question is, what if you contract for a certain number of hours with the state police? So you contract for 6 hours a week. So then they come every Monday and Wednesday for 3 hours on in the afternoon. The criminals start to know, well, don't, commit any crimes during those hours. And I know that sounds crazy, but some of the towns told them that. And I'm sure that Senator Pearson can talk about that as well. So all of these issues are addressed in this legislation. They may not be addressed in a perfect way, but that's why they're hearing lots of testimony. And lastly is something that I think brings us to our next topic, which is prohibiting the Department of Public Safety from performing 911 service and looking at that whole regional dispatch, as we know and we've been working on here. So there are issues around that too throughout the state. So those were some of the issues that came up around policing. And then I've got some other stuff I could talk about as well that are on the mental health program and that embedding the social workers. So, but why don't we go with this? Because I'm sure that Senator Pearson, who was at all of those meetings, so it seems a little odd that I'm presenting them. I apologize for that, but didn't realize.
Well, I'll just say that one of the higher level things we were trying to look at, and Joe mentioned this, is the discrepancy between towns. And there's a wide variation. But for instance, every town and every citizen in every town pays state taxes, which support the Vermont State Police. But you guys pay for your own police force. Now, Charlotte does not have their own police force. So in a sense, Shelburne is subsidizing Charlotte, I would say, in two ways. One is you're paying for state police, but then you're also paying for your own police force. So when something happens in Shelburne, your own officers respond. If something really grisly happens in Charlotte, your officers will also help out there. So you're helping directly occasionally, but you're also taking some pressure off the Vermont State Police because you have your own police force. So this is sort of repeated all around the state and in more and more dramatic fashion, basically the smaller your town. And we're trying to figure out if that's right. The sheriffs also play a role in many towns of our state. The sheriff is the primary law enforcement. In Chittenden County, we don't think of that at all. I don't think. We think of them as maybe court officers and traffic, directors. But in Franklin County, for instance, if you call the police, pretty good chance that a sheriff or a deputy of the sheriff's department is going to show up. So trying to understand some of those inequities, some of the cross subsidies between towns, some towns paying absolutely nothing for law enforcement other than their state taxes, trying to figure out what's fair and how to bring some common policing benefit to everybody. To me, those are enormous questions, and they won't be satisfied this session with one bill, but if there are some discrete things we can look at, we'd like to move in a direction that's more equitable for all Vermonters.
And you have a question? Sure.
I appreciate the comments about duplicating, police for Shelburne and Charlotte. Just as an example, I hope that the legislation would include some sort of language about, protecting schools in these communities where there are no police. And I think that it's hard, like you mentioned, it's hard. You mentioned it's hard for the state police to respond in certain situations based on proximity. And I think that there have been situations in Charlotte where schools needed protection, schools needed action in our day and age. And I think the state police were really stressed out trying to cover that, and a system to cover or at least account for towns that don't have police forces would be beneficial to schools in those towns.
It's one of the reasons why the dispatch question is very central, very important, because you want to have, I think most states do dispatch, let's be charitable, more efficiently than we do. And Charlie Baker's here with the Regional Planning Commission. They've been working on the project that Shelburne, I know, is centrally involved in it. Seeing if we can do one for the county. There are states that have one dispatch for the whole state. The point is that you want some central entity when you get a call to understand what's going on in Charlotte. The person getting the phone call needs to know, well, the nearest officer there might be a Shelburne police officer. And if it's school, I'm going to guess that Shelburne police are going to say, well, and it's probably you guys actually, right, doing the dispatch here. But the point is trying to be as efficient as possible with the few resources. The moment Montpelier or locals decide that we need more police, we're going to have to come to you and ask for more taxes, and people will be up in arms about it. So these are all the things that we're always balancing. I'm assuming that schools sort of have a special status for law enforcement, that obviously we're acutely interested in protecting our students. But I guess I'll take it on a bit of faith that's already in the works, but it's a very fair point.
So the last one, and I told some of the people here to hurry up and get here at 8:30, so for regional dispatch presentation. But so we'll get to that. But last point on policing, Shelburne, for example, in this current year budget, we put 6,000 plus in with a consortium of other Chittenden County communities to fund an embedded social work program for our police department through the Howard Center. And we've also, in the budget presentation that I just put together, even given a difficult budget year, I think that there's some feeling that this is at $13,000 a year, a reasonable attempt at an investment to combat and help with some of the mental health issues, help police officers who may not be the right person to be involved in that at the point of contact. I guess I'll just throw it out. What is the state doing, or some of the legislation to help with this issue and this problem?
I'll just quickly say that today we had a summary of the budget adjustment. The budget adjustment just came out for 2018, so it's an adjustment to the budget. And there is funds, provides grants for community-specific mental health outreach consistent with mental health stabilization efforts. There is $65,000 there, and it is for towns that are working on these issues and willing to put in half. They get back half. So you could apply for a grant for that $13,000 with you have to do it with the agency. So I think that there's some hope there. Certainly, I do believe that the state is very committed to trying to help with these mental health issues that our police force are seeing, our healthcare systems are, they're all taxed, and it's clearly a priority.
There's an opioid coordination council that was created by the governor after the end of last session, and they just provided their first report to the House Human Resources Committee today, and they're looking at the whole range of issues around opioid addiction and how you might treat it and address it in all the venues that it arises in. So I can get you that report, actually.
Great.
That's the rest. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little tired. I'm spacing out.
Are there any questions from people who've hanging on here? Thank you so much, and I hope you stay for some of the regional dispatch stuff, even though you've probably heard it a few times, but if you can, that'd be great.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Here's some notes on your own.
Oh, thank you. Oh.
Oh, thanks, Keith.
Oh.
Our municipal licensing plans for this legislative session.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you both for coming. Good to see you. Thank you.
Talk to Jessica, just that guy.
Ahead of the next presentation, and we are again expressing our thanks to our representatives. It's especially nice to make the acquaintance of Senator Pearson. I will make a few comments to you, one of which is that there's one of the special strengths that Joe brings to his job is relationships with active and productive relationships with state representation. Those aren't to be taken for granted. He spends considerable time, and I think his interest and enthusiasm is reciprocated. Clearly, as you've seen tonight, these are essential, very critical relationships in the well-being of a town, and not often recognized on the surface. So as someone with some background in them, I think Joe deserves some commendation along those lines. Secondly, quickly, and with the forbearance of my colleague, I have one further comment about the rest of the agenda. We neglected to thank Peter enough, as well as Chris and others of staff who have participated in this budget. It's a pretty extraordinary piece of work. I urge you to take a look and to follow up with questions as you've been invited to do so of any of us, including us on the board. It's a very thoroughgoing, reasonable effort at addressing the balance of need in the community against the capacity to pay. And there may be in the year and years to come a very pronounced need to reconsider that balance. Something that I think we'll probably be discussing a little more about in the spring. As you know, we are without a quorum. That means we are incapable of making decisions tonight. I just wanted to share with the two of us what might remain that we might have made a decision on that we're not going to. They're clearly, I guess we're okay? So from my sense of it, we should continue to treat this as an opportunity to learn, and a rather exclusive one in the sense that we don't need to observe all the formalities, some of which we become used to, some of which we probably don't need. And that serves as a further introduction on Joe's part, of Aaron Frank, a new colleague of mine, of whom I hold in the greatest of respect, to make a presentation on the new proposed regional dispatch. The issue here will be in the coming next meeting, and maybe one more, but next meeting definitely. The issue is whether joining this should be put to you on the ballot in March. This is a preliminary step. So what we're eager to start as a matter of public education is not to take sides, of course, as to whether yes or no, but to begin helping you understand what the issues are as you may or may not be presented with an opportunity to vote on them. And in that, to that effect, we're appreciative of the effort that Aaron and Charlie, you may comment as well, are going to make, as well as the time and energy that the town manager has spent on this for a year and a half, nearly 2 years. And I think if it's okay with everybody, we'll just continue the same process we've been following and let you folks take over, and we'll go from there. If anybody has a question, by all means, speak up, and you've got a lot of expertise sitting right here ready to answer you.
Thank you, Jerry. And so Aaron Frank is the Deputy Manager of Colchester. He's also the chair of our Union Municipal District Committee, the Joint Survey Committee that has been working on this. Charlie Baker, the Executive Director of Regional Planning. Regional Planning has helped organize us. I'm going to let Aaron do most of the talking today. He's been really doing quite a bit of work on this. Plus, I think it's helpful sometimes to hear from someone from the outside, so to speak, give the information. As I said at the last meeting, I haven't been working on this, neither has Aaron or anyone else that's been on this committee in a vacuum. We've all been appointed by our various legislative bodies a few years back, quite frankly. And so we've been, working at the pleasure and at the direction of our select boards or city councils for at least 2 years now. Like I said at the last meeting, the way that we're doing it now is not awful. It's not even close to awful. Shelburne is a regional dispatch center. We operate by contracts, not by a governance structure, so to speak. And we do a great job. And there's nothing that's going to take away from the outstanding job that dispatchers are doing in Shelburne and Colchester, all over. What we're looking at is possibly a more efficient, more effective way to do it. But that does not minimize or say that the way it's working now, it just simply doesn't work. That's not true. That's not fair. Our dispatchers are doing a fantastic job. But, we've been researching ways that it's done across the country, and maybe a way that can be done effectively here in Chittenden County. It's been looked at as a preferred method of delivering the service since at least 1964. And this is probably maybe as far along as it's ever got in the last 50 years. And Aaron's done a great job. I'm going to let him take it away.
Mr. Story, Joe, thank you for the kind introduction. Indeed, we've been working on this for some time. And again, the issue before the Shelburne Select Board in the next few weeks, I think by January 24th, is to make a decision whether or not this issue should be placed before the voters. That is, should an organization be created that could have a board of directors that would be allowed to further develop and operate regional dispatch in Chittenden County? And Joe made me aware of some of the questions that Mr. Dean and Mr. Hines had from the last meeting. I did watch your meeting, and I think I can answer a lot of those in the presentation, but again, feel free to ask if I haven't covered it. Okay, Dr. Dean, thank you. If I can just get this presentation. So why are we doing this? As I think Joe has shared with you before, there are 6 public safety answering points. That's where 911 calls go when you dial 911. Shelburne is very fortunate to be a public safety answering point in that they answer a lot, most of your calls here in Shelburne Dispatch. And that saves, on average, based on some sampling we did, 71 extra seconds per call. So outside of Shelburne, where they're doing what I used to call double dispatch, first you go to the state police, they take your information, and then they have to catalog it and then forward you to local dispatch. That takes up an average of about 71 seconds extra. And if you have a life-saving emergency, you want to get a lot quicker than that time. So Shelburne has that now. The rest of Chittenden County would like to, have something similar. Why are we doing this? In addition to the issue of the PSAP time, is there are 6 dispatch locations in Chittenden County. Only one of them has on all shifts more than one person. That's Burlington. So Shelburne has times when there's only one person. And if something happens here, you dispatch for, I think, roughly 35 other public safety agencies. It's easy for one person to get overwhelmed. And so if you have multiple people working in multiple communities in the same location, it's a lot easier to keep up with the workload. For instance, in the windstorm that we had, Colchester was overloaded. So, we brought an extra dispatcher in. A police sergeant came in to help dispatch. I came in the morning, but we found out Shelburne dispatch, it was quiet. So if we had regional dispatch then, you folks could have helped us, and likewise for other events. So the staffing issue, at sometimes we're overstaffed when there's not calls, but then it's very easy to become understaffed. That is an issue for Shelburne now, along with everyone else. Mutual aid is very important. Your neighbors to the north and a little bit to the east, South Burlington, have full-time fire and rescue staff in the stations. If something big happens here, they come down. Whereas if right now you'll have to call over to their dispatch, and so you're having to, take half an extra minute in, life critical time to do that. Whereas if everybody was in the same location dispatching together, you'd get the information, find out where the quickest local person was. And even if it's a neighboring town, you could dispatch them quicker. And again, that's really critical in an emergency situation. Fire and EMS calls. Burlington is the only community in Chittenden County that has what they call a dedicated fire desk. And that's important for fire emergencies, for the dispatch to check back in on them. And if it's just a couple people out in a truck, make sure they're okay. But also in the Torrey Hall fire, even with Burlington, and they have 2 people minimum, but often 3, it took after the incident commander was on site at Torrey Hall, they said, hey, we need a lot more help there. It took their dispatch 6 minutes just to issue all the requests for mutual aid from the other communities. And think about if you had all the dispatchers from all the communities in one location, issuing that information via a electronic system where you just take the information in and it gets pushed out over auto voice messaging versus phone calls or radio calls, it'd be a lot quicker. In fact, less than a minute, according to the fire chief there. So, that's real. We talked about schools earlier. That's a key critical place. And again, the call taking process, it works better for mostly the other communities, but that's an issue that some of the rest of us have. Why are we doing this? Just some national statistics on, kind of the EMS side. That's a real rescue up in Colchester. And then here's some information about how fast fires grow if they're not addressed quickly. So it's life and property that we're trying to address in a more responsible manner with this. So again, here's a little graphic about how becoming a public safety answering point combined with local dispatch eliminate 71 seconds. You guys are, very lucky here to have that in Shelburne. The rest of us want to have it. One of the ideas is if Shelburne becomes part of this regional entity, maybe a couple towns and cities band together, and when Shelburne comes on, the rest of us get to become a public safety answering point at the same time. And so that's something we have, but it's very important to this issue. And a lot of folks said, who's doing what now? Who has how many calls? So the left side is city or town, the major towns in Inner Chittenden County. Law calls for service, and then fire and EMS calls for service, total calls for service, and FY16 total dispatch costs. These include the costs of police supervision. I was just with one of our sergeants. Our most senior sergeant spends about half of his time overseeing dispatch. And Burlington was able to hire a civilian dispatcher, but it's something that's kind of done on a part-time basis in the other communities with police staff. And so that's money that could be reallocated to something else, about $500,000 between all the communities. And then the direct costs of dispatch, those are paying the dispatchers, paying for the equipment that they have that the state doesn't provide on an annual basis. It's about $3.5 million. If you put this in the big picture of public safety, you guys are working on your budget. I'd venture a guess roughly half of it is police, rescue, and fire, including dispatch. And dispatch itself is, maybe 2 or 3% of your total budget. So dispatch in itself isn't huge. It has an important leverage effect on how quickly you access the other public safety folks. I want to point out here, though, your current position, $292,000 is what you're paying after you subtract off the contract revenues and the revenues you receive from the state for your public safety answering point. You look at Winooski that's operating their own dispatch about $400,000, so roughly $100,000 more, and Essex about $523,000. So you guys are kind of showing that this works. You're dispatching for some 35 other public safety agencies. You're reducing your costs, and you don't always have more than one dispatcher, but sometimes you do. So you're kind of leaning in the same direction. You're saving costs, and you have more folks available to help dispatch. If you look at Colchester, we're in the same boat. We dispatch for Milton. They joined us some years ago, and we've had a long-standing 20-year partnership. So we're able to have 2 people on the peak shifts to share with them, and it helps us out too. But if you look at a community like Winooski, they're generally 1 person on a peak shift, and the same thing with Essex, kind of going it alone. So it's kind of something that works better when you do it together. So how do we do something about this? When we began looking into this, the group was really this group in the yellow here. It was predominantly the public safety chiefs. And the public safety chiefs are the folks, they're responsible for dispatch. They're thinking, what tools do we give our staff? How do we arrange for this? They're the kind of business leaders in this arena. And they said, we've looked at this before, but it's ripe to look at again. And it turned out Colchester was looking for a partner. It seemed South Burlington was interested. Burlington was interested, and Shelburne was also interested. Winooski was interested, and Williston knew at some point the state might change and not provide a lot of their state police resources to dispatch their police. So we had a lot of communities interested, but again, it started off with the fire, police, and rescue folks. We came up with some kind of concepts, and Charlie, some kudos on this. He really helped dig into with us what are the governance issues, kind of the guiding principles. We came up with these 11 guiding principles that needed to be addressed within a governance model. So we came up with all these issues that we needed to address. And then we examined different models. This was kind of concurrent with a technical study done by a firm, Delta Works, that looked at how would you implement it, but it was more operational, their study. Ours was more how would you implement it in Vermont, given the governmental tools that our state provides? And those are different in every state, so it was more appropriate that local folks did those. So we looked at 7 different models. We had attorneys, some municipal attorneys looked at them. The one we came up with was a union municipal district. It had legislative power, the power to enforce ordinances, not all ordinances like your town here, but one specific to public safety. You can see there alarm ordinances. The businesses could benefit from a common alarm ordinance across all the communities this entity serve rather than a different one in every town. Prosecution for 911 calls, and then, potential future issues. But it could also borrow at government rates, apply for grants, which could be important, government immunity in the public safety arena, that's an insurance issue, and that's important, and it has a less complex governance structure, and it also doesn't require specific approval to the state legislature to gain a charter. There's actually a statute in the state of Vermont that would allow you to start one up. So here's kind of a more organizational viewpoint. This is something that got started with the consultant. You can see there would be a board appointed by the member communities. They would look at big picture things like, personnel policies, developing annual budgets, kind of a lot of the things the select board might look at. And then the advisory committee, there's 38 public safety chiefs roughly in Chittenden County, would be more detail oriented. They'd figure out things like, what are the common protocols we're going to use all across Chittenden County to dispatch fire, so that these dispatchers only have one set of rules and everybody understands what they are. So they'd be a more operational committee. There'd be a public safety communications director, essentially a chief for dispatch equal to the other chiefs. It wouldn't be, somebody that reports to somebody who reports to somebody to the police chief. It'd be up there with the other services and kind of give dispatch a higher prominence in public safety. There'd be shift managers, which would become operational opportunities for advancement in dispatch. Right now, it's pretty flat. There's one manager in the whole county in dispatch now. Training and quality assurance, quality control, something that isn't a specific function, but we could definitely use now. And then specific IT telecom support. And given the model of most of the communities there could be 5 cross-trained dispatchers. You'd be trained in all the areas, but on a given shift, you may be assigned to one of these desks, so to speak. And I mentioned earlier, Burlington has a dedicated fire desk, but in any of our communities, should we have a big building or a mass casualty event, it's something you'd want to resource logistically from a dispatch. And this would give you the capacity to do that. And really, everybody in the organization would probably have the capacity to dispatch. The director, just like a police chief, would also be somebody who could stand in and dispatch. Certainly the shift managers, the trainer. And so you'd have a lot of resources to bear on this entity under this kind of a model. And we came up with an incremental model. You wouldn't do it all at once, turn the key on. You would do more detailed planning, ramp it up, bolt 2 communities together, and we envision on the bolting together having the same head count as present. There's some natural attrition in this business like any other, but we're not looking to save money, have fewer dispatchers. We need the quality folks that we have now. Over time, there might be some savings, but it would be natural rather than planned. What are other entities that are union municipal districts? Since 1967, when this idea has been around, CCTA was created in the mid-70s. Essentially, it was a private sector bus company, decided they needed some support from the government to continue. That's grown into GMTA today. But it was an existing entity that was, regional in nature. Champlain Water District was created to create water distribution. We had systems, but we wanted treatment and distribute to the locals. And the Solid Waste District was a state mandate. Every community had to join one. And then we have, of course, the Park District. So no community has ever quit one of these regional entities. They've continued to operate and develop specific technical knowledge in these areas and operate fairly successfully. And the CCPSA, Chittenden County Public Safety Authority, would be similar to these other regional entities that folks have created over time. So how does one create a government? Well, if you have a not-for-profit or a private company, you want to create it, we could do that now. We could log on to the Secretary of State website in about 10 minutes. Next week we could have Secretary Condos would have mailed us a little note saying your business is created. Government, not so easy. It's purposefully very deliberate and slow. You could contract with another government in 2 to 6 months. I think Shelburne has some relationships with South Burlington and Stormwater. It takes a while to get those things together. And that's how you folks contract with your other municipalities and services for whom you dispatch. You have a model, it works. That's how we work with Milton. But when you're talking about, having a lot of governments work together, ideally for a long time, you want to have a model where they can all participate. And so you really need to create another government so they can all have a formal seat at the table, just like your select board here. So that can take 1 to 3 years, depending on the process, to create a new government. So where have we been and where are we going? As Joe mentioned, this has been explored since the 60s. Over time, Burlington has dispatched for other communities. South Burlington has dispatched for other communities. Early 90s, Shelburne began dispatching for other communities. I think you guys pick up a few every year. We in Colchester have been approached recently, but we've said we want to hold off until we get through this, regional effort, see where it goes, and then we can address it through that matter. The public safety community was involved in a big study effort in the 90s called Vision 2000. And it was, it got along. It didn't quite get to the level where an entity that could house it was proposed. But the public safety folks were pretty serious about it, and they kind of asked us to revisit it. The Regional Planning Commission has all the information about these past studies. They're there, but essentially they say regional dispatch is possible and desirable. The challenge is, how do you get there? That's a quote from the Free Press, 1967. Some towns wanted regional dispatch. So in order to create a regional government, the select boards and councils have to create a joint survey committee. We've got Darren Adams, who's on the left, the Milton Select Board chair. He was actually a dispatcher for Milton before they joined with Colchester, and then a Colchester dispatcher. And the rest of us are managers, assistant managers. And we've got Steve Locke, not shown, but he's the fire chief in Burlington. This was a major issue for him in order to better address fire safety. So we really went about our charge, which is to write a charter or a constitution for the organization, and that's how you have to start a government. It's very high level. If you look at the town of Colchester's charter, it doesn't say what the deputy manager CFO does. It maybe says, 10 things about the town manager and maybe 50 things about the select board, and then processes for voting. So it's very high level, but you've got to create it. The state, Vermont, kind of has an outline of what needs to be in these documents. We had legal counsel, a number of city and town attorneys, auditors, and I think about 90 people were involved in providing input and edits to this. I think we had about 90 versions of this document over time. Finally, the Department of Public Safety, we met with the commissioner there. They were fine with it, and I think it helps them address some of their issues with regional dispatch that you just heard from the state perspective. And finally, the Attorney General signed off on it and said it contained all the matters that it would need to, and it could go to the select boards and councils to vote on it. I should add that as agents of the select boards and councils, the committee voluntarily put a clause in it saying that the select boards and councils needed to sign off on it before it went to the voters. And really our thought was, this is an effort that's so integral to municipal government. You can't get access to police, fire, and rescue without this. If we don't have the select boards and councils, support at least to bring it before the voters, it's not ripe. So that was really our thought, that let's get it through the select boards and councils before we just bring it out. Legally, a joint survey committee could just forward this to the voters. We wanted to make this more integral into the business of the boards before it went out. So what is the structure? How does dispatch work now? Public safety chiefs, really police chiefs who report to managers and mayors, oversee public safety dispatch. They get their funds from a manager's request to the legislative body, and now they're separate operations. How would it work? With the advisement of public safety chiefs, managers and mayors or their appointees would oversee a director of public safety dispatch. Legislative bodies would still have the complete authority for the budget. There would be one operation. And what we did was we kind of thought about, well, what are the controls now? The select boards and councils really have the purse strings, and the implementation is a few layers deep in the organization. We left that power with the select board. In fact, we looked at the other regional entities and found the one with the most inclusive budgetary process happened to be the solid waste district. Essentially borrowed their language, and they have to come before all the local bodies as they do every year and ask for their budget approval, and a majority of the select boards have to approve it. So we chose the one that was most inclusive of the boards. How would budgeting work? I used to work for GMT, CCTA, so I was pretty familiar with regional budgeting. The key is to get it in early so the municipalities can plan for it. If it's a big increase, they need to plan for that. If it's a small one, they need to know about that. So we kind of bumped up the budgeting so that it would slide into municipal budgeting well. And again, it provides a good amount of time for the legislative bodies, over a month, to consider the budget and provide information on it. While we thought there'd kind of be some owner cities and towns, and those would back any debt needed, if we need to buy any radio systems or expensive dispatch equipment, but we also wanted to have the capacity to contract with others, much like you do now. Some of your neighboring towns in Addison County could be valuable for mutual aid, and some of the smaller Chittenden County communities might want to contract as well. We provided a process to do that. We also provided to give them a contracting municipality director to sit on the board and have full rights and also represent their communities with regard to the budget and other issues. But finally, we talked to some communities, and having an organization with a mix of funding, some that are kind of in it in the long term as members, kind of owners of the debt and long-term stewards, but some who can come and go as they wish, is actually healthy. It lets you make sure you're focused on the quality service and the price of service. So, a mix isn't a bad thing, and we're not envisioning some kind of, exclusionary pricing for non-members. We want to have the, good service to the smaller communities as well, but it's just a different viewpoint. You don't have to be a member to get service or representation. So cost sharing, this is important. So if the select board allows a citizen vote and the citizen in a community receives majority approval, the board of CCPSA will be created. So they'll have a board, they'll sit around a table, they'll develop the organization further, and then when it's ready to provide service to one or more communities, they'll ask the first communities to sign MOU on funding. Possibly not all of them, just the ones that would first get it. And the public vote or the select board vote would not bind any financial decisions or operations. So the select board, after they receive that memorandum of understanding on funding, we actually developed it, attached it to the charter, so you know what we're thinking. Once you sign that, then you're bound to pay into the organization, and that's kind of called ratifying. You'd have to have another vote of the select board after the public vote, and that's really, when you tie the knot with the organization. At that point, the way the MOU works is there's two phases. We didn't want to have to wait until a whole new budget year to start providing service. So there's initial funding. The municipalities could provide funding that they had dedicated to their in-house dispatch, but just transfer it to an external entity, much like if you were doing something, with your home or with your business and decided to contract it, you could give your initial budget. And the idea is we would continue this until all the communities had received service for a full year. And then we get a sense of, okay, what does this budget look like? What efficiencies have we gained? And then we could figure out, okay, what is the long-term funding? We came up with a formula for the long-term funding, worked with all the public safety chiefs, defined in great detail what does calls for service mean. It means something different to everybody, but we got everyone to agree what it means here. Essentially, anytime a public safety staff member is requested to do something, that's a call for service. We do a 3-year rolling average. Sometimes a town or city will get folks that, you have a specific traffic safety issue, and so you might have more tickets. You don't want to have a spike just because one year we were trying to address an issue, so 3-year rolling average. We also looked at a smoothing formula to avoid increases of more than 4.9% for member communities. Honestly, this would protect the ones like Colchester and Shelburne that are contracting now and kind of doing a lot with their budget more than some of the other communities that aren't. But, it would help you smooth things out. So you'd smooth that in over time if there is a budget of greater than amount. So cost allocation, these are kind of rough numbers based on all the communities coming in. On the right, you'll recognize that table. Current costs, $3.5 million. Those are direct costs, the cost of paying for the operations. On the left is a table, kind of how do we get into cost allocation? You do total calls, including contract service, subtract out the 11,000 contract calls, which is, I think, about what you folks have here in Shelburne. Subtract the sheriff's calls. Right now, those are being done for free. We don't want to have the sheriff we don't want to charge the sheriff and then have the sheriff charge us back through the county tax allocation. We just figured we could do their calls for free, which is what's really being done now. Winooski and Williston provide for those. And then we would take out the funding from the contract service, the funding from the PSAP, which would grow substantially by providing the 911 call taking for most of the county. The net costs about $3.1 million, and then you would roll them out to the communities based on their percentage of calls. You can see, even with some cost escalation under this concept, if everybody was in, Shelburne ought to turn out to the good. This is a concept. What we're really promoting is here, we can get your emergency services to you quicker. We think that we might be able to do better with the money, but we feel at least we can do it for a similar cost. So a possible timeline, should this go through, and I think we required 3 or more communities to participate, with 2 probably contracting is better. There could still be an interim test, but if there was, that could be folded into the organization. If Shelburne's one of them, when Shelburne comes in, the rest of the organization, we become a public safety answering point. We could advocate to the state that we want the funding for being a public safety answering point. It might take a little while to get the money, but providing that service, getting rid of those extra 71 seconds a call is very important to the rest of us. And then we would plan the service, do any training necessary, test it, implement it, work out the bugs, and then come up with a new implementation plan for the next community. And we just keep doing this until we've got all the communities on board. And then we look at, do we have capacity or interest in contracting with other communities? So that's kind of what the implementation process is. We designed it kind of more private sector-like and flexible. We're not going to say this town then, this town then. We want to, test it, try it, implement it, get it right, and then let it roll out. We're not going to say, right now somebody's going to come this month and that month. If you had to do that, you'd only get one community a year, which is much slower than the way we'd like to do it. So who supports this? We've got 17 different public safety chiefs from 8 different communities, some representing more than one service, a lot of the fire and rescue. And Taylor Yates in Milton represents fire, police, and rescue. Lake Champlain Regional Chamber wrote us a letter of support. Clearly they're interested in, better service for their businesses, employees, business owners, the people and the property. A lot of folks. What makes this better? Mutual aid across towns, computer-aided dispatch, just a lot better technology to support the folks we have now, increase dispatchers in a location, additional resources. We could have supervision, quality assurance, training, career advancement, and really treat the profession a little better, having a chief of dispatch just like we have a chief of fire and rescue and police, who really is one of their area. Dedicated oversight for police calls, and again, better service for similar cost. Next steps, the legislative bodies decide whether or not to put this on the town meeting ballot. 4 communities have so decided. Essex, I think the vote was not at this time. And then we have 3 communities that need to decide by the 24th. And should voter approval be gained in 3 or more, it will authorize the district to form, but not obligate towns to pay or receive service. And then we'll work together as a board with whoever votes to join it to develop it further. I think one of the questions of your last meeting was, well, could we develop more? And we're really at the point we have my boss, the town manager, and the select board kind of loaned me to this. I've been working often 25 hours on it for the last year, and we've got some other business of the town that I've got to get back and focus on. So Colchester, the other communities are ready, and Shelburne will have to decide if it's ready and the time is right for the board to do this or not. And I think Essex was the point they wanted to give it to some time and see how it goes. So I want to acknowledge CCRPC, Charlie Baker. He and I kind of sorted out at the beginning the organizational models. He spent a lot of time on that. Lee Crone, who I think serves on your local rescue, did a lot of the operational research. And now Emma Vaughn helped us do some graphics like this nice one here. So we definitely appreciate regional planning and Joe and others' input. So that's what I have to say, and I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron.
So I don't know if you want to take some questions. I know we're getting a little late, but we're here. It's not an official meeting, so people can just chit chat or ask questions or.
So Charlie Baker with the Regional Planning Commission. I just, really want to kind of sum up this by, I think, number one, emphasizing the point that Joe started with. Nothing in this conversation is meant to really say anything negative about what the work that the current dispatchers do. I think they do great with the system that they have. It's really, can we create a better system? And then in terms of what is actually in front of the municipalities and the town residents in terms of voting at town meeting day, if we decide to put it on the ballot, I think it's a little hard to kind of wrap your head around, but we're kind of trying to take a very staged process and create the organization, but then the organization does need to do that work to decide on things like salaries and benefits for dispatchers and operational procedures. And then that needs to really, the towns are going to have to come back and vote and say, okay, are we ready for our dispatchers to join this organization now that we know more details? But we're in a very catch-22 situation at the moment, because it would be really nice to know those details, but that organization needs to be created in order to negotiate and develop those details. So anyway, I just wanted, it was kind of there, but I just want to kind of emphasize those points. It's a little challenging, and so I think we're here to answer any questions about the processes as best as we can figure out what it will look like, but there are certainly operational and organizational details that need to get fleshed out if the organization gets created. But we're really at a threshold question, like, is there a willingness to create the organization to try to help do this better?
Thank you, Charlie. Gail?
Do I need to use the mic?
Well, he's still recording, so you might as well.
I'm just curious, this was really very interesting, and I'm curious how our absent members are going to get this information.
Well, we wanted to make sure that we did it while the VCAM was rolling, so hopefully it's not just for people who are here now and might be watching online, but ideally folks will watch the replay. We have done a number of presentations up to this point, but I think until it becomes real, and maybe it's more real now because we're actually thinking about putting it on the warning. We'll do our best to advertise this presentation. I thought Aaron did a nice job, and I'm sure if I work with VCAM, we can even just separate it out and put this presentation, link to it on our website. Make sure that people have the information, because it's important.
Yeah, by use of the usual outreach, and maybe with Mark's help, we have another week to invite discussion, invite interest. We certainly can repeat critical portions of this next week. We didn't anticipate or know that we would be so shorthanded. So, but I'm sure everybody involved is going to be more than willing to respond to questions and provide as much information as anyone will need.
I think Dr. Metz had a question.
Doctor?
Nobody ever told me that they needed it for my voice. A couple of observations. I appreciate the presentation. Number one, Shelburne's system, as you yourself noted, is working extremely well. And I, speaking as someone who was a quote-unquote dispatcher for search and rescue on the entire Great Lakes in the Coast Guard, which I was, there's no substitute for local knowledge. And I think we would be giving up some measure of local knowledge. Our dispatchers here have local knowledge, they have personal knowledge, and this is impossible when you regionalize something and centralize something. This is something inevitably you're going to lose. And the old saying, if it's not broke, don't change it or don't fix it, may apply here. The structure that you described, although it's legal and it's logical, it's also seemed to me maybe it's just my limited understanding, but it seemed very cumbersome. The setting up of it and the fact that we're not masters of our own destiny anymore, but we have to apply to this place and that place for funding and procedure, to me, that's a drawback. And I know all these things eventually can work, but we're humming along pretty well here in Shelburne, and it sounds like we can help a lot of other places. The question is, how can they help us? And I have a serious doubt about that.
And I think that Dr. Metz, brings up a good point. And I think one way to potentially look at this, I agree with much of what Dr. Metz is saying. I think Shelburne, of any of these communities, has the least to gain through this, except for if you ever go to Church Street now, as a Shelburne resident, you no longer have the benefits that you do when you're at your home. I mean, Shelburne's system right now serves Shelburne residents while you're at your home extremely well. But I think Shelburne residents travel throughout Chittenden County and spend time elsewhere. And all of a sudden, the system with the local knowledge, which is true, and with the kind of one-stop shopping that Shelburne has, is no longer quite as beneficial. So I think that that's something to at least consider, right? But I'm not going to discount.
But I don't feel that by remaining with the system we now have, that we're taking away from somebody else. And I would be in favor of, as Dr. Dean said last meeting, I would be in favor of, you already have 3 who've signed on right now, right? Is that 4 that have already signed on right now? You need 5, right? You need 1 more? You need 3. Well, I would say set it up and let's see, A, how it works, and B, how Shelburne could work into it without losing any of its present system. That's what I would be in favor of.
Thank you, Doctor. There's no doubt, of course, it's the case that we're the board to favor placing it before the town to decide. And you, I think some, if not all of us, would be very hesitant to gatekeep in that regard. Those are surely some of the major arguments and good ones as you've made them. There's an interesting point of view following on some of the discussion we had earlier about budget, that the cost trajectory over time for an individual operation shouldn't possibly be relied on as benign. In other words, longer term, you're investing in probably a reduced cost for the very same services. That's probably one of the major rationales for some of the regionalization that Aaron pointed out. Solid waste, water, which also have characteristics of essential public service. We heard, excuse me, give me another minute. We also heard tonight about the crushing burden, financial burden that water is going to cost us. Not only wastewater, but and so it's were this to happen, and in the process of discussing it further, not least making input to the general body that might ultimately be created, it parallels probably some of the same discussions we should have as a community in terms of what are services that we're retaining at potentially disproportionate cost to us versus those that might be conducted by a regional body and that then in the future offers less cost. But you make really good points. There's time next meeting to discuss the issue. I'm sure Josh, Dr. Dean, is regretted he had to miss tonight's discussion. I'm sure he'll be eager to participate next Tuesday night. And I appreciate your points. Sorry,
No, it's okay. Charlie, thank you. Good to see you. Aaron, thanks to the entire joint committee on this. This is a lot of work and a lot of material to digest. So, two questions. One I think I had referenced in the previous meeting was, talk to us a little bit about the benefits of having a foot in the door early, right? What is sort of the benefits from just a voice in the budget process? Are there discrete things that we can communicate to the community about? Here are the pros of stepping in at this point in time. Dr. Metz and others have raised pros about maybe waiting a bit, but it would help to just better understand what the benefits might be of joining now.
So, I think it's important to really want to. It will take public outreach and really the select board's giving the community the opportunity. But again, these functions are so integral to, public safety, which is almost half your budget. The Joint Survey Committee saw fit to really let the select board be the gatekeepers rather than us. So I would say if you feel it's likely you want to do this, now is a good time. We did develop the cost allocation model. We didn't have to before we got to this stage, but we did it. It was, calls for service. That's not cast in stone. It could be changed, but that's an important function that has been developed. It seems pretty stable. Coming up with, what are the folks going to do? We'll be consulting with the chiefs of the communities about exactly how does this work. So, if Shelburne is in, we'll be working through the common protocols with the Shelburne chiefs. If not, we'll be developing those. They're going to have to be pretty common, not a lot of opportunity for customization, but again, it is a seat at the table, with the chiefs group and with the folks developing the overall policies. But again, I think you want to weigh that with how likely is it that you want to do that now. I think it is a good point. Folks in Shelburne don't all work in town. They travel and shop elsewhere. But I also should point out that roughly half of your dispatch service is communities. Half of your calls for service are communities. Some of them aren't even in Chittenden County. So they're trusting your folks to do what we're proposing, and it's working for them. So in some ways, it's proving it works for others. It's whether you're ready to think about whether it's something that could work for Shelburne. But he recently picked up some contracts from the islands, and that's fairly distant, and we haven't heard they're going to go somewhere else next year. So that's kind of a good sign. So there are some policy considerations, but mostly it's about how quickly you might want to do this.
Charlie, would you let Mr. Saar raise a question?
I think he's going to answer the same question that I asked. Yeah.
Did you want the mic?
We have an excellent system in Shelburne. That's agreed. How are you going to persuade the other municipalities to come up to that standard? And isn't it likelier that we will sink to theirs?
So one of the key things we're seeking to do is to have a public safety answering point. And generally, the state doesn't give those to just one community. The fact that you're dispatching for multiple communities in Chittenden and Addison County, there's something like 35 contracts. That's why you got that. So we need to band enough communities together to allow the state to give us that designation of public safety answering point. You have good people here, but you also have a different system that allows you to save time. And so really that's what we're seeking to do, one of the key things, but we're also seeking to provide more backup for the dispatchers, the training, the management opportunities. So we think we'll rise to a high standard together, and by banding multiple communities, we'll have more resources to do so. It doesn't take away from anything you have, but we feel our prospects are brighter working together.
Forgive me, Charlie, but you were going to respond to the earlier question.
Well, and just to kind of try to make the point again that this is a unique situation where I think you can kind of have your cake and eat it too, or I never know which way that goes, or you can eat it and have it. But because you can join the organization and participate in the decision making about how it will operate and budgets and the personnel decisions or whatever are happening there, but you don't have to join it right away, right? I think there's a 2-year window after, and by joining, I mean, you have to join the organization, but you don't have to commit money and human resources to it for up to 2 years after the organization's created. So you can kind of have the benefit of seeing how it goes after a little bit, but being part of it on the ground floor at the same time to really affect it and make sure it grows into what you need it to be, or its best possible future. So it's because we did this staged process of creating it, but then joining it later by a separate decision with money and human resources. You kind of have the benefits. If you want to wait, you can wait a little bit before really committing resources, but still join at the beginning. Or you can let others create it and decide if you want to join later. So either way you want to do it, but I would think if you want to, and you guys have a big stake in how this is done, as Aaron's referenced, and you all know multiple times, you do dispatch for a lot of different agencies. I think your voice at the table would be very valuable in making sure it is the best that it can be to serve your community and all the others.
And the way the ratification would work, Charlie, is that it's put before whoever is sitting here, right? For each municipality, it's the 5 people who are presented with their local budget, so to speak, right? Or their local allocation, is that? Am I understanding it?
The way it's set out is the future board of the organization would ask one or more communities to ratify the funding agreement on behalf of their community. And then, ideally before that, there's a conversation about who wants to go first, who wants to go second. So, we can order people and then onboard them as they are comfortable. Some folks would do it tomorrow if they could. Some might want to wait until later. So first there would be a rational ordering, but once the board formally asks your community, you have 2 years to ratify it. And after those 2 years, if you don't ratify it, you lose your vote on the board. And then I think it's something like 2 years after that, you're off entirely. So there's kind of a gradual process of, hey, let's first ask the cities and towns that are ready to go. And then, if somebody had a desire to go last, they'd still have 2 years to ratify it after that. So if a community wanted to be involved in it, thinking that they would take it seriously, but maybe not want to be first, that could absolutely work within. We tried to create a flexible structure within government, and I think we succeeded, but you guys will be the judges.
So we could persuade you to do it alphabetically.
Well, many different ways, indeed, yeah.
Linda?
Linda Reel, Falls Road. I know you're saying you can't answer many questions until things are rolling and we're farther down the road. But what are your thoughts on a dispatcher who is looking at having things end here in Shelburne and having something big out there? What does that mean to them personally as a dispatcher?
It's definitely a change. It's going from, now you're dispatching for 35 others. It would be becoming part of a different organization, dispatching for other entities as well. And so, we would have common protocols. They might be different from theirs. Now the job would change. In many ways, there would be more support. I mean, what happens when you get overwhelmed by yourself now here with the 35 communities you're dispatching for? So you become part of something bigger. There's some good with it, but there would be change. And, we're not discounting that. One of the things that, Burlington has brought to the table is they bought a nearly $500,000 modern computer-aided dispatch system that could be used by this. And it's a tool that, we have corners in Colchester that unless you live there a few decades, you don't know what all the corners are, but you can put geofences in. So there's tools that can allow you to use human knowledge as every community is onboarded. You take the dispatchers from that community and you say, what's special and unique here? And you put that in the system. So we certainly value them, value their knowledge, and try to make that part of a new data system that would allow everyone to use their local knowledge, basically leverage their resources. It's changed. There's, some opportunities with it. There's, as I said before, there's only one, manager position in dispatch in the whole county. And here, there'd be multiple shift managers, trainer, and some other functions. And then there'd be a chief who would be actually of your profession, just like police, fire, and rescue, who's actually a dispatcher. And, I've always found that nice if my boss knows and can do what I do. But to acknowledge, yes, change, but, generally we feel more good than bad.
And just to tag onto this, it would also mean a dispatcher ending their career here and reapplying as a new employee somewhere else with a different pay scale, different benefits, different duties and responsibilities. So it would be a total change for a dispatcher leaving or having this system end and applying for a job in the regional center.
So, yeah.
Charlie?
If I could, a couple things that I think specific for Shelburne dispatchers, I think that's a unique group across the other dispatchers in the county because you're PSAP trained, right? So you already have the highest level of training. So based on what I know, I'm thinking that they're probably at the highest level of that training and may benefit the most from whatever new pay structure. And I'm not sure it's going to be as they have to apply. I mean, it may be that the organization is making offers to current dispatchers to retain a dispatcher, right? There's a lot of reason that this entity needs to retain all that local knowledge and create a beneficial situation for the existing staff. So my hope, maybe I'll express it as a hope, is that it's a much more positive transition. It certainly is change. I'm not going to try to minimize a change. That's always challenging, but I do think the Shelburne dispatchers in particular are kind of have a leg up almost in the process because they're PSAP and that's one of the desires, but the career opportunities and other things, I think there's a hope that it's a really positive thing for dispatch staff individuals. So,
anything else, Linda? Okay. You got a question? Tom?
I just wanted to address Dr. Metz's point about the advantage to having local knowledge. And that, I think, has become less important now with satellite imaging and GPS. Now, I was formerly on the fire department here in town, and I know sometimes the first arriving firefighter at the fire station while we were waiting to put a crew together would be on the computer looking at Google Maps, not Google Maps, but Google Images to zoom in on the location of the incident and get a better idea of the layout of the land, the buildings that might be involved if it happened to be a fire call or whatever. And so I agree with your assessment, but I don't think it's as important today as it would have been, even 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tom.
Aaron, will we have that presentation available to put up? Okay, great. We can put that up on the town website.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll work with VCAM to put
Perfect.
Aaron's presentation up
Great.
as well.
It's outstanding, really.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron.
It is, yeah.
Thank you.
You know what
Lot
we're
of work.
talking about.
Thank you guys for your time and consideration.
Thank you
Well,
for
thank you for
coming in to
and
talk.
for being patient as we anyone else like to complete the presentation? Chris or Jerry, or we thank you, Aaron, for the time, Charlie for the time as well. I think it was extremely well spent, and we'll repeat again and again. I'm sure Mark has taken very careful note of all of it, and we'll repeat again and again. If you have questions, don't hesitate. if Linda, you have developed more, or Dr. Metz, to let any of us know where we don't know the answers, we'll, by habit, pass them on to somebody that we think does. And when we do that, we expect Joe will always have them. So whether that's fair or unfair to him, he can know they're coming. Thank you, Aaron, again. Thank you,
Thanks,
Charlie.
Charlie.
Yeah.
Thanks, Aaron. I think we should adjourn, right?
Well, we have there is an
but,
additional period of public comment. Is there, Dr. Chris, okay?
That would be the doctor.
Yeah. I shouldn't have said in tandem. You're not necessarily a partnership, are you? Dr. Chris, you want to go ahead? You're standing up.
Well, I'll just take a moment. Bide with me a little bit, if you will, because I know this is rather informal and there's nothing that's going to come as a decision or anything of that respect. But at the last meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, the board had an executive session at the end where you covered 3 subjects? 5 subjects. See, I knew somebody would keep me straight here because I wasn't here for that part. And one of them involved the railroad, correct? And I'm not asking for any details on strategies or anything like that. But it's my understanding, I've heard the second party, if you will, that the board is going to be talking with the railroad and holding off on filing with the Second Circuit. Is that correct?
You want to respond?
I guess what I can say is we've issued a public statement. The public statement is on the town's website. I can't recall word for word what the statement is, and secondly, I'd say there was a motion that was passed with respect to the appeal.
Okay.
So beyond that, I'm not 100% comfortable without a quorum here.
Okay.
As
Yeah.
well as
No,
just
and that's
the
fine. 'Cause
content of the
like I said, I'm
question,
not trying to
think.
stick anybody
No, I
on
know.
the spot. But I would applaud the conversations. I think that would be very important. I know for myself, and I think for anyone who has gone there and had conversations, there's a different side. It's the coin. There's another side to that coin. It needs to be heard and seen and experienced. So I applaud that. I think that's great. I question the vote, because the vote happened in executive session, did it not?
No.
Because I've heard it didn't happen back here.
I can respond, and I'll repeat what I've said previously. No vote occurs in executive session.
Other than real estate.
That's true. There are some
Technically.
very special circumstances. But technically, none does.
Yeah.
In this case, as it will sometimes happen, not just because of the hour, which at that point was close to midnight, but because of the turn of conversation, just simply the influence of 2 and 3 and 4 sharing ideas, things emerge in discussion, gain
momentum,
gain some credibility as an idea, gain support among all members, perhaps represent a compromise, perhaps represent an entirely new idea that no one has discussed previously, thought about. There's no written reference. And in that process, sometimes you just simply emerge with an idea that is consensual. My personal take on that situation was that was mostly what occurred. That versus going in with specifics, we came out with a consensus on how to approach this situation. The next step, and again, I'm speaking personally, the next step would have been ordinarily to go back to the open session and along with 4 other matters, vote. The reason personally I feel that was delayed in a sense, was because at that point, late at night, there had not been opportunity to simply make the town attorney aware of what was being discussed, which is not just a protocol, obviously. That's a pretty essential communication. Secondly, there was a reliance on one or two to fashion the exact language. You may recall when we had the situation with that Jamie and Joe moved away from us in his office that morning. We had that Saturday meeting, and quickly, really remarkably in my mind, over a period of 10 or 15 minutes, developed a statement. You remember at Joe's desk? That's a skill not all of us have.
That's
right. And you want to be sure that the wording is what is representative of what people thought. It also has to survive tests of credibility, legality, and lots of other things.
Well,
and I think the feeling was that's very difficult to do on the run, on the fly, again at midnight after a very long evening. And the idea was to take some more time the next day, in fact, and put that together. That's not a black and white, up and down, yes or no explanation in and of itself. It's an explanation based on our common experience, and in my view, I believe it more than substitutes for what otherwise might have been, under very different circumstances, an expectation that you came out and then voted on something as a recorded matter.
Listening to you and what you're saying, I would almost myself think there really wasn't a need for any type of a vote, because it wasn't that you were saying you were going to retract and not go to the Second Circuit. You were all entertaining in discussion the concept of, before you do this, before you submit to the Second Circuit, to have a conversation. I don't think it requires a motion to tell the attorney to hold off until you hear differently from us. It would if that conversation led to retracting the appeal.
Speaking personally, I wouldn't want to be misunderstood there, Chris. Giving a heads up to the town attorney under those circumstances was simply a matter of a partner being made aware of what's going on, who didn't happen to be there.
Right.
Lots of us going home at night are in the habit of giving a heads up at some cost if the next morning somebody shows up with a new refrigerator. I mean, it was just a sort of a family practice.
Yep.
And, as to the matter of ongoing litigation and how this fits or doesn't, that's a subject, as Jamie has indicated, is communicated in our product and is available otherwise, and is probably not prudent to discuss here.
I just wanted to make sure that a motion at the wrong time wouldn't compromise something. So I just wanted to bring out the point that if a motion was made before you came back to this room, that it may want to be revisited with the board as a whole, again, during the open session, not...
You don't make motions, Chris. You don't vote in executive session.
That's right. And that's all I'm clarifying.
Yeah.
There was no vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But
Thank
your
you.
experience with it, and I think it's wonderful to have your sense of it and your understanding, because you've been there, done that. And there's sometimes just not a complete understanding of what goes on. No. Sometimes very good ideas happen, and when they do, you capture them the best way you can in the most formal public process that you can. Sometimes that doesn't end up neat and tidy at 5 minutes of 10 on on item 14. And
I'm done with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Doctor, sorry. Doctor was right behind. He was number 1A, so
I was alarmed tonight to hear our state representative say, what could you do if you had a robber downstairs and you had to call the state police and they couldn't get there for a few minutes? 2 years ago, Chief Jim Warden held a community class on home safety. And his advice was, in that situation, to make some noise, for the person upstairs to make some noise, to which I added 12-gauge noise. Thank you.
That wouldn't be the sound of the shell dropping on the floor either, would it be?
Just say I believe
Yeah.
in the Second Amendment.
I'm sorry, you forgive me, but I don't know your name. If you could let
in
it.
Shelburne. My name is Irene Renner. I live in Essex. And the reason I came tonight was to hear the regional dispatch presentation. I have gone to 10 of their joint survey committee meetings, and I have paid very close attention because as I've seen with many issues in the 13 years that I volunteered in Essex, 11 of which I'm a selectman, but I'm not speaking for the select board, I'm speaking as a citizen. It's very difficult for someone who's invested a lot of time and energy into any one project to then present it showing all sides. And again, tonight I was disappointed because I have talked to Charlie Baker and begged him to please show us the downsides as well as the upsides of doing regional dispatch. I could talk all night, but I will not. It's very late. I wanted to address the one comment because I too was under the impression that because you can order a pizza or you can call Uber and they can find you, 911 can do exactly the same thing. What I discovered in an article from the Wall Street Journal on January 7th of this year is that while Uber can find you, 911 cannot always find you. I have put excerpts from that article onto a website that I have personally designed and funded. It is called chitcountydispatch.org, and it is my best attempt as an individual to show both sides of this issue. I would urge you to please come to this website, chitcountydispatch.org. Give me your feedback, push back. I don't expect anyone on either side of this issue to like the website. My goal is to introduce this very, very complex proposition to people who are unfamiliar with it, to give you an overview and allow you to come next week and ask better questions than you might have been able to otherwise. So I've already taken up too much of your time. Thank you so much.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes,
Since
you
you
may.
live in Essex, do you have a sense of why the community, or at least the select board, voted thumbs down on putting it out to the town for a vote?
There was no support from staff that I saw. They were feeling very strongly that dispatch was not broken there and that there was no reason to be first out of the gate. These are my words, not theirs. In switching to something that was an unknown, that there's no data to back up, that is unproven, and Essex is just fine with waiting and seeing that we now have a critical number of towns who do want to do it. Let's have them show us the proof of concept, and in a year or two, we'll gladly revisit it. But at this point, we just didn't feel like there was an incentive for us to go down that path.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You might not have intended to leave us in suspense, but the reason for that discrepancy between Uber calls and Uber location and 911 is that today 80% of 911 calls are smartphones, and the system was designed for cell phones.
Landlines.
So if you're operating a smartphone, which some people in this day and age only know, for those of us who used to have hand receivers, you're going to run into much more helpful hands with Uber or Amazon or anybody else than you are with 911. It's a very interesting development and says something about the rapidity with which these changes occur and how important it is to try to get ahead of them. But thank you for coming. We appreciate your comment.
Thank you. And if I may add from the article, it did say that within a year or two or three, the 911 technology should be
Going to
caught
catch
up.
up. Yeah.
And at that point, we can save over a minute in dispatch response time as well. So there are other ways to save a minute, if that's the other thing.
Thank you. Is there, do you wish to make a comment?
No.
I don't think either of us are tempted at the moment. Is there anything else? If not, we cannot adjourn. We do not have the votes to do so. But we can thank you for.
I just want to say thank you for having
Yeah.
this meeting tonight, and thank you for being so courteous and just very open to everyone's ideas.
Here, here.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm sure Jamie deserves more credit and Joe even more than that. But it's been kind of fun. These could be fun meetings if we had them occasionally without the formalities. We still can exchange views. But in any case, we're apologetic. We're sorry. But thank you for your
Thanks,
patience
everybody,
and for
for
hanging
coming.
in.
Have a good night.